A mother fears the worst when she can't get a hold of her daughter for several days.
I was ringing her bell, and she never came. So I called the police, and they came.
Inside, they find the recent college graduate dead from gunshot wounds.
She was shot in the head twice, and we only had one casing, which made us believe the person had cleaned up the scene.
Somebody's trying to hide what they did.
She's so caring. Who would do this to her?
The police search for an answer.
There are so many rumors going on, horrible rumors.
That's crazy. Niggas really put my name in that. Wow.
Yeah, well, that's what we're here to clear up.
As a trans woman, a lot of people were interested in what was happening.
It could be a crime of passion. It could be a hate crime.
Or was it a cold-blooded murder?
This was a calculated act of violence.
You could be with somebody for a whole decade and not really know who they are.
She went to sleep trusting this person.
We were warned long ago that love is blind.
May 31st, 2022. It's Tuesday in Albany, New York, the capital of the Empire State. But there's nothing imperial about the town itself.
Albany is known as Small Albany because it's got like a small town feel. It's lots of festivals and fairs. Very close-knit.
Albany's a nice area, a lot of history in this city.
But this morning, one of the city's residents, a Sid Hemingway Powell, has mysteriously gone silent.
I called her Sunday. She didn't answer, so I'm like, maybe she just wants some time to herself.
Sid was known for just dropping off the radar. Sometimes she just needed peace of mind.
But after 2 more days of silence, Jackie Powell is starting to get worried.
I kept calling her, and she's not answering her phone.
She hadn't heard from her since the 27th.
So she decides to go to her daughter's apartment.
Sid, it's Mom. Are you there?
I was ringing her bell, and she never came.
When there's no response, she calls the Albany police.
Jackie Powell called for a welfare check on her daughter.
Officers from our patrol division responded out there along with building management to access her apartment.
Oh, these are nasty. This will get you into the world.
So just get us in now.
Yeah.
But it turns out they don't need a key.
When they got to her specific apartment, it was unlocked. It was closed, but it was unlocked.
The patrol officer tells Jackie and the property manager to wait outside.
They told me, we can't just let you in.
The patrol officer walked in. Nothing seemed in disarray or out of the ordinary. He's calling out Sid's name, trying to get some response.
Are you in here, Sid?
He goes to the back bedroom, and Sid is on her bed. She looks like she's sleeping.
But as the officer approaches her, he quickly realizes this is a sleep that she'll never wake up from.
Sid was unfortunately located deceased.
But Jackie's daughter isn't just dead. She's been murdered.
Sid had been shot in the head twice.
"30-year-old Sid Hemingway Powell had been a fighter all her life.
She don't mean any harm to nobody. She fights for love. She fights for her friends, her family.
And she did it with style.
Sid was always super outgoing and everything. She always had a lot of friends.
For Sid, the excitement never stopped.
Sid was the life of the party. Sid and I both loved to dance, but Sid will always try to outdo everyone, including myself.
Sid was like a wild child, but in a good way.
As she got older, Sid started participating in modeling shows, rapping, and performing on YouTube.
She performed under the name Chum Chum, and everybody loved it. She had a real talent for it.
And she dreamed of making a difference.
Sid wanted to change the world, and she believed that it started with you. We have to make the change.
Also a diligent student, Sid earned an associate's degree at a community college. But she wasn't finished.
She enrolled at the University of Albany. She wanted to get her degree to become a physician's assistant and then go on to become a doctor.
She wanted to help people. That was her thing.
In 2022, she graduated with a degree in biology.
Whatever challenges came her way, she was able to go beyond that because she was empowered to make a difference, not just for herself, but also for her community.
She was just amazing. She's the type of person that if you say, I'm going to the moon, she's going to read up on it. We're going to build this rocket. You could do it.
They celebrated her graduation with a party where she was surrounded by all those that loved her.
It was always just nothing but love at the end of the day.
But now,
Sid?
Only a few days after the happy occasion, Sid has been found murdered in her apartment.
Sid had sustained 2 gunshot wounds to her head.
She was beyond help.
The officer comes outside and tells her mom, Jackie, that Sid had passed away.
Did you find her?
Ma'am?
He was like, she's deceased. I just started crying.
Despite the shock, Sid's mother wants to help.
Do you have any idea who may have done something like this?
Nobody.
She was popular with all of Albany.
But Jackie Powell does tell police she was always afraid something like this might happen.
Why is that?
She was trans.
This might be a hate crime.
30-year-old Sid Hemingway Powell seemed destined for success.
She just graduated with a biology degree and was looking forward to starting her medical career as a physician's assistant.
Sid has so many goals that she wanted to achieve.
But now, after not hearing from her for a few days, Sid's worried mother has asked police to do a welfare check on her.
Albany police went to Sid's apartment and, upon making entry, located Sid, deceased. She was shot in the head twice.
Sid's mother tells the police that in the back of her mind, she'd always feared something like this might happen.
Her mother had worried about her safety because Sid was transgender.
Is that why she was murdered?
We wondered, was this going to be some kind of hate crime?
Or there could be a more personal motive.
Did somebody just not like her? We don't know what happened.
Was this an event where someone had met someone at a bar and went home and then was surprised that someone was trans? That was a fear.
As Sid's mother is taken to the station for a formal statement, homicide detectives arrive to begin the investigation.
Myself and Detective O'Donovan went to Sid's house and began to process and work the scene.
They start with the victim.
She was located in bed, covers pulled over her. She looked almost to be like sleeping.
On the left side of her bed, next to the wall, there were pillows propped up that looked like someone was just sitting on the bed next to her.
Investigators also see 2 gunshot wounds to her head.
Sid was shot in the left temple and also in the right temple.
Then, looking around the room, detectives find a single shell casing on the floor.
Somebody had taken the other shell casing, trying to hide what they did.
Detectives quickly rule out robbery as a motive.
The place wasn't ransacked. It didn't appear that money or credit cards or anything else was missing.
The one thing detectives couldn't find was the victim's phone. They suspected the killer didn't want the police to know who she'd been communicating with before she was killed.
That would reinforce what investigators suspect. Sid knew her killer.
Sid's door was not forced, and all the windows were locked. So whoever did it was allowed in there.
It had to be somebody she open the door for her and let them in.
In fact, the killer may well have been someone close to her.
In homicide cases, 2/3 of the cases that the victims are transgender. The people who end up killing are, intimate partners.
Unfortunately, the apartment complex didn't have any security cameras. So there was no video that could have identified the killer.
After finishing up at the apartment, detectives returned to their office to talk to Sid's mother.
The first thing I want to ask about is, when did Sid transition?
It was right out of high school.
Sid's mother admits that at first it was hard for her to deal with the change.
I was mad, but we got around it. I accepted it. It took a little, not long, but it took a little minute for me to come around.
Eventually, Sid's whole family embraced her new identity.
Your personality doesn't change. It doesn't change who you are, the soul that you have.
Was there anybody that had a problem with Sid being trans?
No. She got along with everybody.
If you had a problem with her, that was your problem, not her problem.
But Sid's mother admits she doesn't know much about her daughter's personal life.
She was private for the most part. She really didn't talk much about her relationships.
However, Jackie says that a few days ago, her daughter had called and shared something very important about her life.
She was like, "Yeah, I got something to tell you. I don't want you to be upset."
She told me that she had HIV.
Detectives in Albany, New York, investigating the murder of a Sid Hemingway Powell, have just learned that not long before her death, the 30-year-old trans woman had tested positive for HIV.
She called me. She was like, "Mommy, they said I had HIV."
She was like, "I messed up." And I'm like, I immediately start crying.
Sid's mother tried to remain positive.
I was like, "Babe, you're going to be all right."
This is 2022. The advancements in medication and technology, it's been tremendous. You can live a long, healthy, normal life with this situation as long as you take care of yourself.
While HIV is no longer a death sentence, detectives do wonder if it had something to do with Sid's murder.
The biggest takeaway from Sid's apartment was that whoever killed her was allowed into that apartment and was someone that she allowed to get in her bed with her.
It was possible that her killer was a lover who had just found out about the test results, who also tested positive, and maybe blamed Sid.
But Jackie doesn't know who that could have been.
My kids don't really tell me about their private life because I start asking questions. I got 100 questions.
After talking to a Sid's mother, detectives interview other members of her family, hoping Sid may have confided in them.
She just wanted the same thing that every girl wants.
She wants somebody who's going to love her openly.
But for Sid, that was sometimes hard to find.
Sid's sister told detectives that Sid would sometimes date men who were on the down low, men who presented as straight to the world.
A man like that could certainly fit the profile of the killer being constructed by detectives.
If you're on the down low, if you're ashamed and embarrassed to be with this person, imagine how you'd react if they tell you they have HIV and you're at risk.
Now detectives are looking for a man in Sid's recent past. But can her family give them a name?
Rumors started flooding in and everybody started saying different names.
But there's one name in particular that keeps coming up.
Very early on, Ayer's name was being provided to us by different family and friends.
26-year-old Ayer Robinson had known Sid for quite some time.
Albany is a small city, and the Robinsons and Hemingways had a cousin or two in common, and they kinda came up near each other.
Sid and Ayer would often hang out and smoke weed, but eventually they took things to the next level.
Sid and Ayer Robinson had been together in a non-exclusive relationship for a long time.
I know about their relationship for, I think, 5 years. It may have been even longer than that.
However, those close to Ayer didn't know.
Nobody from his life at that time knew.
He has children and baby moms and things like that, whatever. It was obviously a lot more difficult for him.
Given the complicated nature of their relationship, police suspect Ayer may have been involved in Sid's murder.
Right then and there, he's a person of interest. He's somebody we're definitely going to want to speak to at some point.
But when detectives ask if they suspect Ayer had something to do with Sid's death, the family finds it hard to believe.
Sid definitely loved Ayer. She mentioned it many, many times.
Every time she talks about it, she's like, oh, but he loves me. We just, we can't be together.
And according to Sid's brother, Ayer knew about Sid's recent HIV diagnosis.
Sid told her brother that she had shared the news with him soon after she got her test results.
And though Ayer is at the top of the list of people police need to talk to, he isn't the only name on it.
According to Sid's siblings, she had been seeing another guy, someone they knew less about than Ayer.
But we actually never met the guy.
They knew him only as Big Papa.
Sid's friends and family were all aware of Big Papa, but the only person who had seen him was Sid's brother Amir, and that occurred on a FaceTime.
Can you describe him for me?
He was a white guy, older guy.
And he had money to burn.
She would ask him for stuff or whatever, and he would give it to her. That was kind of the relationship with him.
Big Papa got referred to as a sugar daddy.
He would take her to clubs and parties, and he would let her use his car when she needed to go somewhere.
But she never told you his name?
No, never.
Hoping to track down both Ayer and Big Papa, investigators subpoena Sid's phone records.
They also subpoenaed her credit card, social media, and bank accounts. Anything that might help track her movements in her final days.
While waiting for results from the subpoenas, detectives received the results of the autopsy.
The autopsy confirmed that there were 2 shots fired into her head, both at close range.
There was some stippling around the wound, and there was damage to the skin, consistent with a gun being pressed against the head and fired.
The time of death was late Friday night or early Saturday morning, sometime before 6 a.m.
But who was with Sid late that night? A call from Sid's mom provides a possible answer.
Homicide?
There is something that she hadn't mentioned that might be important.
She stated she had been with Sid a couple days prior. Sid had been FaceTiming a male in Louisiana.
His name was DJ Barnes.
They had met online. They were messaging over Facebook.
But it was more than just an online relationship.
Sid had actually bought him a bus ticket to come up here from Louisiana. DJ was going to be coming into town before the date of Sid's death.
Was he some kind of online predator?
Detectives have just learned that before she was murdered, a Sid Hemingway Powell was planning a first-time meetup with a man she met online.
Sid had been communicating online with a man named DJ Barnes, back and forth, and it was very flirtatious.
DJ and Sid had met through social media, and there was a plan for him to come to Albany to visit her.
Had DJ traveled to Albany to see Sid and then killed her?
That was another question that needed to be answered.
Maybe the meeting didn't go how DJ hoped it would. Since they never met in person, maybe he didn't know Sid was a trans woman.
When detectives get access to Sid's phone records, the first contact information they pull is for DJ Barnes.
The Detective Laura conducted a phone interview with him, and he admitted to having some sort of like online relationship with her.
But he insists he had nothing to do with her death.
He said he learned about what happened through social media and that he was sad he never actually got to meet Sid in person.
He planned on trying to come up and see her, but he said it never ended up happening.
So detectives ask him about the bus ticket to Albany that Sid had bought him.
He said his boss never ended up giving him the time off, so he never used the bus ticket.
Investigators contact the bus company to confirm DJ's story.
The bus ticket was never cashed in.
Albany police were able to show that he didn't leave Louisiana.
With DJ eliminated as a suspect, detectives turn their attention to Sid's alleged sugar daddy, the man known as Big Papa.
I never met him. I never seen him in person.
But now, detectives are able to identify him.
We figured out through her phone records Big Papa's real name.
He's a 60-year-old Albany resident named Kyle Collins.
The investigators ran his name through a police database, and they found a very minimal criminal record. The worst thing was a fairly recent charge of petty larceny.
But when detectives head to the address on his arrest record, there's nothing there.
It was just an empty lot. If he lived there before, he doesn't now.
When investigators call him, though, they have more luck.
Hello? We were able to finally get in contact with him by phone, but he kept the interview very short.
What exactly was your connection with her?
According to Kyle, they talked on the phone fairly regularly, but it had been nearly a year since he'd seen her in person.
Kyle had not seen her in a while, and his reason was that Sid was too expensive for him.
What do you mean?
Kyle says that Sid liked to party and go to clubs, and that she'd ask him for money.
All right, look, I'm going to ask you straight up. Did you have anything to do with her murder?
Absolutely not.
He even claims he was out of town the night Sid died, and his phone's GPS data can confirm it.
A follow-on of his phone records, he showed not to be in the area of Sid's apartment on the night she was murdered.
There was no indication that Big Papa did any harm to Sid.
But after clearing Kyle Collins, investigators get another possible lead.
Detectives were contacted by another one of Sid's friends who said she was hanging out with Sid at her apartment on the Thursday before the murder.
While she was there, Ayer Robinson came over.
What happened then?
She had asked him to go into the bedroom just to talk.
And when they came back, she could tell something was wrong.
The energy was off. She wasn't really there.
What about Ayer?
He didn't really say a word.
I'm just gonna go.
All right. Will call me later?
Yeah. Oh.
When her friend finally asked what was wrong, Sid said she'd received some bad medical news.
What is going on?
I went to the doctor and they told me I have cancer.
Oh my God, Sid. I am so sorry.
Detectives know that Sid didn't have cancer, but she had recently learned that she was HIV positive.
Could that be what Sid told Ayer in the bedroom?
I don't know. Maybe.
To find out more about Sid's diagnosis, detectives contact her doctor.
After getting several HIPAA waivers and consents, we were able to interview medical staff at the Infectious Disease Center.
A staff member says she remembers speaking to Sid when she came in for testing, and that she wasn't alone.
She came in with a guy.
She was accompanied by a black male who also requested HIV testing.
Do you remember who it was?
I can't tell you his name.
Was the man Ayer Robinson?
Ayer Robinson was seeing Sid on the low.
Could an HIV diagnosis be the motive behind the murder?
Detectives investigating the murder of a Sid Hemingway Powell have learned that when she went to a local clinic for an HIV test, she was accompanied by a black male.
The man had also been tested for HIV, but because of patient confidentiality, the clinic staff could not release his name.
Give you his name.
Was Ayer Robinson the man with Sid at the clinic? Or was it another boyfriend investigators have yet to identify?
We'll be getting a court order to unlock the man's records.
Okay.
When detectives get their warrant, their suspicions are confirmed.
Ayer Robinson was the man who came with Sid to get HIV tested on the morning of the murder.
Was he still with her that night when she was murdered?
We had determined that Ayer Robinson was a suspect, but we wanted to keep building. We knew this was going to be a circumstantial case.
Detectives start by getting Ayer's phone records to track his movements after they left the clinic.
We're able to get where their phones were located at certain times. We're able to see they went to a nearby McDonald's, which is in walking distance to the clinic they had gone to.
They enter the restaurant and stay there for a bit, presumably having a meal together.
After that, Sid went to her apartment, and Ayer left in another direction.
We then track him all throughout the city until he goes into a corner store.
Detectives are able to track Ayer's movements until finally he returned to Sid's apartment.
Ayer came back to Sid's apartment around 8 o'clock that night. That was only minutes before Sid made her last social media post.
The data shows Ayer stayed in Sid's apartment until early the next morning, when both phones left the building.
The GPS data showed the phones traveling down the road toward the Albany airport and then stopping at a hotel.
Detectives immediately request footage for any of the hotel's exterior surveillance cameras.
The hotel was affixed with security cameras, which we were able to review. As soon as we did that, that's when it got good.
The video shows a car pull up, and a black male gets out.
He just starts smashing this phone on the ground, to the point where he actually has to take his crossbody bag off because it's bouncing so hard.
He then goes over to the dumpster and throws out the cell phone and his sweatshirt.
Investigators can't be sure that Ayer is the man in the video.
You couldn't determine who the person was, but you could tell it was a black male.
However, the investigation of the hotel ultimately yields important evidence.
Through our review of video surveillance, we're able to get a license plate to obtain a registered owner of that vehicle.
The owner is a known friend of Ayer Robinson.
Now, they didn't just have a guy who matched Ayer's description. They had a guy who looked like Ayer driving one of his friend's cars with Ayer's phone in it.
All of that circumstantial evidence is enough to obtain a warrant for Ayer's arrest.
We were conducting surveillance on Ayer Robinson's house, and if he came out, we were going to detain him.
While they're watching the house, Ayer comes outside, but he quickly spots the detectives.
He ended up fleeing on foot.
Please stop! Ayer Robinson proceeds to go in a full sprint down the street.
There's a short foot chase where he discards drugs.
He's dropping something!
The chase comes to an abrupt end.
Some good Samaritan opens his car door into Ayer to stop him. Ayer Robinson is taken into custody.
After the arrest, officers searched the house where Ayer was staying.
A quantity of narcotics, along with a loaded firearm, were recovered.
But the gun is a different caliber from the shell casing recovered beside Sid's bed.
We never recovered the murder weapon. We believe it went in the dumpster along with his hoodie and Sid's phone.
But the police find one more piece of evidence, one that could make their case.
The individual that's destroying the phone in the video surveillance is equipped with a crossbody bag.
Inside Ayer's room, they found a crossbody bag.
We believed it was the same one.
Inside, they see what appears to be dried blood.
That's our evidence.
In a search of Ayer Robinson's house, detectives have found what appears to be dried blood inside a crossbody bag, seemingly identical to the one seen in security video on the man they believe killed a Sid Hemingway Powell.
Detectives believed that blood spatter got on the gun when the 2 fatal shots were fired.
Based on the wounds Sid had, we believe that it was a close contact gunshot. The belief was that after they shot Sid, they would have reholstered their handgun into the crossbody bag.
With Ayer in custody, the detectives are ready to confront him with what they found.
Ayer Robinson's transported down to our detective office and interviewed by Detective O'Donovan and myself.
The detectives tell Ayer that they know he's been having sex with Sid.
People told me they heard you saying you love this person. Right.
Ayer ultimately admitted he was in a relationship with Sid.
I laid with her, I chilled with Sid, you feel what I'm saying?
But he denied testing positive for HIV the morning of the murder.
No, I didn't get no bad news that day.
But the detectives know both he and Sid tested positive when they went to the clinic.
It's not even supposed to be, that's supposed to be confidential.
Ayer also denies having anything to do with her death.
That's crazy.
Yeah, well, that's what we're here to clear up.
So the detectives switch gears to the night of the murder.
So we know that you go over to Sid's house on Thursday the 26th, and you're the last person that's with her while she's alive.
I don't think I was the last, though.
Okay. At any point, do you take Sid's phone?
No.
Ayer just thought we didn't know as much as we knew.
The detectives show Ayer proof that his phone and Sid's were in the same locations after the murder.
We showed him his phone records for the night of incident.
And they tell him they have him on video smashing her phone.
And you're on video getting out of that car, throwing a phone on the ground. Do you remember any of that?
Yeah, angry because she went to my phone.
Ayer also has an explanation for why he's on video throwing his hoodie in the dumpster.
I had liquor all over my hoodie.
Okay.
He was quick on his feet with answers to stuff.
He even has an explanation for the blood found in the crossbody bag during the search of his home.
He came up with a wild story of how Sid had gotten her finger pricked at the doctor's, and she had used a tissue to stop the bleeding and gave it to him.
But there's one question he doesn't have a ready answer to.
We asked Ayer if, when he left the apartment, Sid was bleeding at any point. After about 2 minutes of silence from Ayer, he stated no.
Ayer insists he can't help them.
Bro, I didn't do that to Sid, bro.
Still, after their interview, Ayer Robinson is booked on a second-degree murder charge.
New York's first-degree murder statute is not for what we would consider the more common homicides that occur. It is for somebody who kills a police officer or somebody who almost like plans like an assassination.
When Sid's family hears the news, they are thankful that it seems he is going to pay for what he did.
When I found out that Ayer was arrested, I was happy. So many murders go unsolved, especially for transgender individuals. A lot of times that we don't see the resources put behind those investigations to help actually solve those murders.
In October of 2023, Ayer Robinson goes on trial for murder in the Albany City Court.
Ayer just seemed very nonchalant, like a smug, I'm going to get away with it type of attitude.
And in her opening, the prosecutor admits she doesn't know why Ayer killed Sid.
I think Sid being a trans woman was a large factor, and Ayer maybe not being comfortable yet with admitting that he loved a trans woman. Thankfully, I don't have to prove a motive in New York. I only have to prove the elements of the crime.
Because according to Sid's family, she hadn't given Ayer HIV. It was the other way around.
Sid's literal words to me were, I need to know his results because once I know his results, I'll know where I got it from.
So according to the prosecution, receiving his positive diagnosis the morning of the murder was likely the catalyst for his actions.
Ayer gets his rapid test. So later in the day, there's a phone call to him from the health provider that says, hey, you're positive. That's the night he kills Sid.
When he went to see her that night, he had a gun in his crossbody bag.
Ayer knew what he was going to do when he went over there.
Are you sure you're okay?
Yeah. I mean, it is what it is.
Okay.
He waited till Sid fell asleep.
Then he took out his gun.
The wicked truth of the matter is he shot my baby in the head. He thought she was alive and went and shot her on the other side of the head.
He gets up, picks up one of the shell casings, and he leaves.
The prosecution also shows the jury the security video of Ayer getting rid of the evidence.
He smashed Sid's phone and threw the phone, the gun, and his blood-stained hoodie into a dumpster.
Instead of disputing the evidence, the defense focuses on Sid and her lifestyle.
The defense attorney really victim shamed her in this case. He painted Sid as this promiscuous girl, as a prostitute.
They try to paint Sid in a trial as some type of sexual deviant. That's just crazy.
It's one thing to defend your client. It's another to go after the dead and shame her the way they did.
But the jury finds the evidence more persuasive than the attacks on Sid's character.
Ayer Robinson was found guilty of murder.
When the verdict came in, I was very relieved. For my first time in my life having faith in the American justice system.
And the judge imposes the harshest sentence possible.
Murder in the second degree, the maximum punishment allowable in New York State is 25 years to life.
It's a welcome relief to Sid's family.
I was just glad that we have answers, that we have a resolution to all of this, because so many families don't.
And Sid's family can take solace in the knowledge that she always lived her life with love and compassion, and without apology.
She didn't want to be seen as just a transgender woman. She wanted her transition to be second to her success and who she was as a person.
Don't worry about how people feel about you. Be you and be the best version of you.
She has so many dreams. Rapper, doctor. I used to be like, babe, what you gonna do? I'm gonna do it all, Mom. I'm gonna do it all.
There is a profound and unsettling contrast between the image the world holds of an island paradise and the harsh, unfiltered reality of what can happen in its darkest, most forgotten corner. When people think of the island of Oahu, their minds invariably drift towards sunlit beaches, the gentle rhythm of the Pacific Ocean, and a sense of perpetual tranquility. It is a place where time is supposed to slow down, where the heavy burdens of the mainland are washed away by the tide. But beneath that postcard-perfect veneer, there is a sprawling landscape of concrete asphalt and hidden shadows. It is a place of deep valleys, isolated stretches of highway, and remnants of an agricultural past that have slowly been swallowed by modern infrastructure. These are the places tourists never see, the liminal spaces where the noise of the world above drowns out everything else, creating the perfect environment for a secret to be buried. It is within one of these desolate spaces, far removed from the pristine shorelines, that a chilling mystery began to unfold, one that would haunt the Honolulu Police Department for nearly 4 decades. The date was September 8th. Still, 1986. The world was a remarkably different place. It was an era defined by a distinct lack of the digital connectivity we now take entirely for granted. There were no smartphones resting in the pockets of every passing pedestrian, no global positioning systems tracking the precise movements of vehicles across the island, and no sprawling networks of high-definition surveillance cameras watching every intersection. The criminal justice system relied heavily on physical evidence, eyewitness testimony, and the slow, methodical process of canvassing neighborhoods. When a crime occurred in the dark, it often stayed in the dark, unless someone was brave enough or guilty enough to step into the light. This was the reality facing the investigators who were called out in the early morning hours to a grim discovery beneath the imposing structure of the H1 freeway, specifically at the Wakele overpass. Beneath this massive expanse of concrete lay what was known locally as a canhaul road. These dirt and gravel pathways were once the arteries of Hawaii's booming sugar plantation area, designed to accommodate heavy machinery transporting sugarcane from the fields to the mill. By the late 1980s, many of these roads had fallen into disuse, overshadowed literally and figuratively by the modern highways built directly above them. The geography of the Wakele overpass created a unique and disturbing environment. The massive concrete pillars plunging into the earth formed a space that was perpetually cloaked in shadows, even during the daylight hour. More importantly, the ceaseless, roaring traffic of the H1 freeway overhead acted as a massive acoustic blanket. The deafening sound of tires on asphalt and the rumble of heavy engines would easily drown out any noise, any struggle, or any cry for help occurring on the Canehall Road below. It was a blind spot in the heart of the island, a place where someone could operate completely unobserved by the thousands of commuters passing just feet above their head. It was in this dark, forgotten space that the lifeless body of a young man was found on that September morning. His name was Gregory Masao Yamada. Born on June 29th, still 1965, Gregory was only 21 years old at the time of his death. At 21, a person stands on the absolute threshold of their adult life, possessing a future filled with unwritten chapters, potential relationships, and undiscovered paths. All of that potential, every possibility that lay ahead of Gregory, was violently extinguished and discarded in the dirt beneath the deafening roar of the highway. The initial sight of a body positioned beneath a towering overpass often leads the human mind to immediately search for the simplest, most logical explanation. A tragic accident, a devastating fall from the edge of the freeway, an unfortunate pedestrian struck by a vehicle and thrown into the darkness below. These are the initial narratives that offer a sense of chaotic, yet understandable, tragedy. However, the physical evidence at the scene and the subsequent forensic examination would quickly shatter any illusion of a tragic accident. The investigators of the Honolulu Police Department determined that the terrible fall from the overpass was not the primary cause of the trauma inflicted upon the young man. Gregory Yamada had been subjected to a severe and brutal physical beating. This was a deliberate act of violence, a sustained assault that occurred before his body was ever brought to the edge of the concrete drop. The realization shifted the entire nature of the investigation from a recovery effort into a desperate hunt for a vicious killer. It meant that the Kane Hall Road was merely a disposal site, a convenient, hidden location chosen specifically for its isolation and its acoustic cover. The actual location where Gregory was battered, the place where he spent his final, terrifying moments, remained an unknown variable in a rapidly expanding equation. The mind recoils at the logistics required to commit such an act. It requires a terrifying degree of intent to physically assault a young man, transport his battered body to the edge of a busy highway, and heave him over the concrete barrier into the void below. It speaks to a perpetrator, or perhaps multiple perpetrators, who possess not only physical strength, but a cold, calculating desire to hide their sins in the darkest corner they could find. They utilized the geography of the Wacklet overpass to buy themselves time, assuming that the shadows and the isolation would delay the discovery of the young man for as long as possible. And in many ways, regarding their own identity, that assumption proved chillingly correct. The morning hours ticked by, the police secured the scene, the evidence technicians processed the dirt and the concrete, and the grim reality of a homicide investigation settled over the department. But the most haunting element of the Gregory Yamada case did not occur beneath the bridge. It did not happen in the shadows or the dirt. It happened hours later in the sterile, fluorescent glow of a commercial bank branch miles away from the crime scene. While investigators were likely still trying to piece together the final hours of Gregory's life, tracing his steps and attempting to understand the sequence of events that led to his brutal murder, a ghost stepped into the frame of a security camera. At exactly 6:13 in the evening on that very same day, September 8th, Sill, 1986, an unidentified man walked up to an automated teller machine at the YNA branch of the Honolulu Federal Savings and Loan, commonly known as. In 1986, ATM mans were a relatively modern convenience, and the surveillance technology monitoring them was rudimentary at best. The cameras recorded on magnetic tape, producing grainy, low-contrast, black and white images that captured movement and general shapes rather than fine identifying detail. Yet, the machine dutifully recorded the transaction and the face of the man standing before it. The chilling detail that elevated this case from a tragic unsolved murder into a haunting, decades-long mystery was the item the man held in his hand. He was using Gregory Yamada's bank card. This singular moment in time creates a psychological anchor for the entire investigation. Just hours after Gregory was found beaten and thrown away like refuse in a lightless corridor beneath a highway, another human being was casually interacting with a banking machine using the dead man's property. The implication is staggering. How did this unidentified individual come into possession of the card? Did he strip it from Gregory's lifeless body in the dark? Did he take it during the violent struggle that preceded the fall? Or is there an even more complex narrative, one where the card changed hands in the chaotic aftermath of the murder, passing from the hands of the killer to an accomplice, or perhaps even a completely oblivious third party? The existence of this footage forces anyone looking at the case to confront a terrifying reality. The person responsible for the brutal end of a 21-year-old life, or at the very least, someone with direct, undeniable knowledge of the crime, was captured on film. They were right there, frozen in time, their image burned onto a piece of magnetic tape. Yet, the limitations of the AROS technology rendered the image a frustrating enigma. The lack of high definition meant that while the police could see a man, they could not clearly see his soul. They could not extract the fine details of his face that would allow a stranger on the street to point him out with absolute certainty. The camera captured his presence, but it failed to capture his identity. This grainy image represents the ultimate broken promise of investigative evidence. It is a clue so massive, so directly tied to the victim on the very day of his death, that it seems impossible for it not to lead to an arrest. For the detectives who first viewed that tape, there must have been a surge of adrenaline, a profound belief that they were looking at the face of a killer and that justice was merely a matter of days away. They had the time, they had the location, and they had a face, however blurry it might have been. But days turned into weeks, weeks bled into months, and months steadily marched into years and then decades. The man who stood in the fluorescent light of the Waianae Hanfed branch vanished just as completely as the person who committed the violence in the shadows of the Wakla overpass. This is the central, agonizing knot of the Gregory Yamada story. It is a narrative built upon stark, unyielding facts that refuse to connect into a cohesive resolution. A young man with his whole life ahead of him is beaten and discarded. An opportunistic figure emerges into the evening light to drain what little remains of the victim's resources. A camera watches silently, recording the aftermath, but offering no answers. As we delve deeper into the circumstances surrounding that fateful September day, we must navigate the empty spaces left behind by a phantom. We must examine the geography of the crime, the limitations of the era, and the agonizing passage of time that slowly transforms an active pursuit into a frozen historical artifact. The story of Gregory Masao Yamada is not just about how he died beneath the roar of the freeway. It is equally about the man who walked away, holding a piece of plastic, disappearing into the vast, anonymous crowds of an island paradise, leaving behind a silence that has lasted for nearly 40 years. To understand the profound tragedy of a life cut drastically short, it is essential to immerse ourselves in the specific era and the environment that framed it. The year was 1986, a time when the Hawaiian Islands were experiencing a massive surge in global tourism and rapid modernization. The cultural landscape was shifting, caught between the deeply rooted traditions of the islanders and the relentless march of commercial development expanding across Oahu. For the millions who visited, the island was a playground of pristine beaches and vibrant nightlife. But for the locals who actually lived and worked there, it was simply home, a place with its own rhythms, challenges, and ordinary routine. Into this world, Gregory Masao Yamada was born on June 29, 1965. By the late summer of 1986, Gregory had just crossed the threshold into full adulthood, reaching the age of 21. At 21, a young man is standing at the very beginning of his own narrative, slowly stepping out from beneath the protective canopy of his family to forge his own distinct identity. It is an age characterized by a restless energy, a sense of boundless possibility, and the quiet formulation of dreams that stretch far into the distant future. When we look at the sparse archival records that remain, we are not just seeing a name on a police file. We are looking at a young man who was likely navigating the everyday complexities of early adulthood, figuring out his place in a rapidly changing island community. He was a son, a friend, a local youth whose days were meant to be filled with the mundane and beautiful struggles of growing up. The sudden and violent erasure of a 21-year-old life carries a specific type of weight, a dense gravity that pulls on the collective conscience of a community. When an elderly person passes, there is a sense of completion, a narrative arc that has naturally reached its final chapter. But when a young man like Gregory is violently taken from the world, it is an abrupt and unnatural severing of a timeline. Every milestone he was meant to reach, every relationship he was meant to cultivate, and every mistake he was meant to learn from was stolen in a matter of terrifying moments. We must pause to consider the vast expanse of unlived days that belonged to him. He never had the opportunity to see how the world would change, to witness the turning of the millennium, or to grow old on the island that was his home. The tragedy of Gregory Yamada is not merely the violence of his final hours, but the absolute annihilation of his potential. The Honolulu Police Department records note him simply as the victim of an unsolved homicide, a cold case file filed away in the archives, but the reality is far more devastating. He was a human being who was denied the fundamental right to experience the entirety of his own existence. The stark finality of September 8th, 1986 represents a permanent wound in the fabric of his family and the local community, a void where a vibrant young man was supposed to be. To comprehend the sinister nature of this crime, we must shift our focus from the victim to the precise physical environment where the aftermath of the violence was discovered. The island of Oahu is a place of stark geographical contrasts, where sheer volcanic mountains dropped dramatically down towards sprawling urban developments and historic agricultural land. Long before modern highways wrapped around the island like ribbons of asphalt, the landscape was dominated by massive sugar plantations. These agricultural empires required a vast network of dirt and gravel paths known as cane haul roads, designed specifically to accommodate the heavily loaded trucks transporting sugarcane from the verdant fields directly to the processing mill. Over the decades, as the sugar industry slowly declined and the demand for rapid transportation infrastructure exploded, the state built massive modern roadways, often directly over or adjacent to these older, obsolete paths. This layering of infrastructure created hidden, subterranean worlds scattered across the island. The scene where Gregory was discovered was precisely one of these forgotten, liminal spaces, located directly beneath the H1 freeway at the Waikele overpass. The A1 is the primary east-west arterial highway on the island, a massive concrete artery pulsating with the constant, high-speed movement of thousands of vehicles every single day. But beneath the elevated sections of this massive structure, the environment shifts drastically, transforming from a bustling, sunlit corridor of commerce and travel into a dark, forgotten underbelly of dirt, concrete pillars, and perpetual shadows. The specific topography of the Waikele overpass provided an environment that was fundamentally hostile to human observation, a characteristic that the perpetrator of this horrific crime undoubtedly recognized and exploited. When you stand beneath a massive highway overpass, the scale of the concrete infrastructure is overwhelming, creating a sense of profound isolation even while thousands of people pass by just a few dozen feet above your head. The massive pillars supporting the freeway plunge deep into the earth, creating artificial canyons that sunlight struggles to penetrate, leaving the ground level cloaked in heavy shadows regardless of the time of day. The cane haul road that snaked beneath the Waikele overpass was a rough, unpaved stretch of earth, a place largely abandoned by regular civilian traffic and left to the slow encroachment of weeds and dirt. It was not a place where a person would casually stroll or happen to pass by on an evening walk. It was a deliberate destination, a place one had to actively choose to navigate into, stepping away from the populated thoroughfares and descending into the hidden, industrial gut of the island's infrastructure. The air beneath such structures is often heavy with the smell of exhaust and damp earth, and the visual field is restricted by the imposing blocks of concrete that support the weight of the modern world above. This isolated, forgotten stretch of dirt became the grim stage for the discovery of Gregory Yamada, a place entirely devoid of the warmth and beauty that define the public image of the Hawaiian island. The selection of this specific location by the killer speaks volumes about their state of mind, their chilling level of calculation, and their deep familiarity with the hidden geography of the area. A perpetrator who is attempting to dispose of a violently battered human body is operating under extreme psychological pressure, driven by a primal need to distance themselves from the evidence of their horrific action. They require a location that offers absolute secrecy, a place where the risk of accidental discovery by a passing motorist or a late-night pedestrian is reduced to near zero. The cane haul road beneath the Waikele overpass provided exactly this type of sinister sanctuary. By utilizing this sunken, hidden pathway, the killer effectively removed themselves from the visual plane of the rest of society, operating in a geographic blind spot where their horrific task could be completed without interruption. This suggests a perpetrator who was not acting in a blind panic, but rather one who possessed the presence of mind to navigate the dark, unpaved roads and utilize the island's forgotten infrastructure to their advantage, hiding a brutalized young man in the shadows of a concrete monolith. Beyond the visual concealment provided by the massive concrete overpass and the sunken elevation of the old agricultural road, the Waikele location offered an even more sinister advantage to whoever left Gregory Yamada there in the dark. The A1 freeway is a relentless, roaring machine of transportation generating a constant, deafening wall of acoustic interference that blankets the area below it. The heavy, rhythmic thumping of commercial truck tires hitting the expansion joints, and the volume of thousands of metallic vehicles cutting through the air create an auditory environment that neutralizes any sound originating from beneath the bridge. If an altercation had occurred in that space, if there had been the sounds of a struggle, desperate shouts, or the horrific impacts of a severe beating, all of those sounds would have been swallowed by the overwhelming noise of the traffic overhead. It is an acoustic vacuum, a place where a desperate plea would be drowned out by the mechanical roar of the modern world. This auditory isolation is perhaps the most terrifying aspect of the chosen location. It gave the perpetrator absolute impunity, allowing them to conduct their violent business without fear of drawing the attention of residents in nearby neighborhoods or drivers passing by just above. They knew that the freeway would provide a perfect shield of noise. By understanding the deep isolation, the perpetual darkness, and the deafening cover provided by the H1 freeway, we begin to see the calculated cruelty involved in the aftermath of Gregory's death. This was not a random dumping ground. It was a highly specific, strategically advantageous location chosen by someone who understood how to exploit the hidden infrastructure of the island. The transition from night to day on the island of Oahu is usually a slow and beautiful surrender to the light as the morning sun crests over the jagged peaks of the Ko'olau Mountains and begins to illuminate the deep valleys below, bringing with it the familiar and comforting rhythms of everyday life. On the morning of September 8, 1986, this natural awakening stood in stark, horrifying contrast to the grim reality hidden deep within the shadows of the island's concrete infrastructure. As commuters began their daily routines, filling the lanes of the H1 freeway with the steady hum of morning traffic, a far more somber scene was quietly unfolding in the secluded dirt pathways directly beneath them. Down on the abandoned Cane Hall Road, shadowed by the immense Waka overpass, the early morning light eventually penetrated just enough to reveal a devastating sight that would forever alter the course of multiple lives and initiate a decades-long search for justice. The lifeless body of 21-year-old Gregory Masao Yamada was discovered lying in the dirt, discarded in a location so isolated and forgotten that it seemed specifically chosen to erase him from the world. The initial discovery of a human body in such a desolate environment inevitably triggers a chaotic rush of first responders, transforming a silent, forgotten stretch of agricultural history into an heavily scrutinized theater of investigation. Police cruisers, medical examiners, and forensic technicians descended into the subterranean darkness beneath the highway, their flashing lights casting long, distorted shadows against the massive concrete pillars holding up the rushing modern world above. When investigators first stood over Gregory's remains and looked up at the towering edge of the highway overpass looming high in the air, the initial and most deeply human instinct was to search for the simplest and most easily comprehensible explanation for the tragedy lying at their feet. The immediate visual evidence strongly suggested a fatal plunge from the elevated roadway, leading the mind to construct narratives of a tragic pedestrian accident, a sudden and disorienting fall in the darkness, or perhaps even a desperate final leap into the void. This initial assumption is a protective mechanism, a way for the human brain to process sudden death as a tragic byproduct of circumstance rather than an act of deliberate, calculated malice. The sheer vertical drop from the edge of the Wakley overpass presented a massive amount of kinetic energy that would undoubtedly cause catastrophic, fatal injuries upon impact with the hard, unyielding earth of the Cane Hall Road below. It was a perfectly logical preliminary theory, one that provided a neat, albeit devastating, explanation for why a young man in the prime of his life was now lying dead in the dirt far below the traffic. However, the pursuit of truth in a death investigation requires stripping away these initial, comfortable assumptions and subjecting the physical form to the rigorous, unyielding scrutiny of forensic science. As the medical examiners began their delicate and somber work, carefully documenting the specific nature, pattern, and severity of the injuries etched into Gregory's body, the narrative of a simple, tragic fall rapidly began to unravel, revealing a truth far more sinister and disturbing. The trauma inflicted upon the 21-year-old did not align with the chaotic, random distribution of damage typically associated with a high-velocity vertical impact against the ground. When a human body falls from a significant height, the resulting injuries usually follow specific biomechanical patterns, such as severe axial loading to the spine, massive internal organ deceleration trauma, and catastrophic fractures to the lower extremities if the victim landed on their feet. Instead, the forensic evidence etched onto Gregory's remains painted a terrifying picture of localized, intentional brutality that completely contradicted the mechanics of a simple fall. The investigators and medical professionals ultimately reached a chilling and undeniable conclusion that completely altered the trajectory of the entire case. Gregory Yamada had not simply fallen to his death. He had been subjected to a severe, localized, and agonizing physical beating long before his body ever crossed the concrete threshold of the overpass. The blunt force trauma, the specific contusions, and the exact nature of the injuries indicated a deliberate and sustained assault, a violent physical struggle that spoke of malice, anger, and absolute cruelty. This was not the result of gravity taking its toll on a falling body. This was the result of human hands inflicting intentional suffering upon another human being. The realization that Gregory was brutally battered before he was subjected to the terrifying drop completely destroyed the initial theory of an accident and officially classified the incident as a malicious, premeditated homicide. This pivotal forensic discovery forced the detectives to confront a terrifying new reality regarding the crime scene itself. The dark, isolated stretch of the Cane Hall Road beneath the roaring highway was not the primary location of the crime. It was merely the final, desperate disposal site chosen by a killer frantic to hide their violent work. This fundamental shift in understanding created a massive, horrifying void in the timeline of Gregory's final hours. It meant that somewhere else on the island, in a location that remains entirely unknown to this very day, a terrifying and violent encounter took place. The primary crime scene, the place where Gregory Yamada spent his last conscious moments fighting for his life against a relentless assault, was completely missing from the investigative puzzle. The space beneath the Weka overpass was simply the silent, acoustic tomb where the killer chose to leave the aftermath of their raid. The logistical implications of this forensic reality are profoundly disturbing and highlight the absolute physical determination of the perpetrator. The killer, or perhaps multiple individuals working in macabre coordination, had to execute a sequence of events that required not only extreme violence, but also cold, calculated physical labor. Following the brutal beating that incapacitated the young man, the perpetrator had to manually transport his inert body, maneuvering a full-grown 21-year-old male to the very edge of a busy highway under the cover of darkness. They then had to summon the sheer physical strength to lift his battered, dead weight over the heavy concrete barrier and heave him out into the empty space above the Cane Hall Road. The audacity required to perform such a heavy, highly visible act on the edge of the H1 freeway, trusting that the speed of the passing cars and the darkness of the night would shield them from the eyes of witnesses, speaks to a deeply chilling level of confidence, physical capability, and sheer desperation. The brutal truth of the forensic examination meant that Gregory's death was a prolonged, multi-stage nightmare. He was not afforded the sudden, unknowing end of a tragic accident. He was forced to endure a violent physical attack, the agony of severe blunt force trauma, and the terrifying realization of another person's deadly intent before his body was callously discarded into the shadows like unwanted debris. As the sun continued to rise higher on the morning of September 8th, fully illuminating the tragic scene beneath the bridge, the detectives of the Honolulu Police Department found themselves staring into a vast, empty chasm of missing information. They had a victim, they had a disposal site, and they had the undeniable medical proof of a brutal, premeditated murder. But they were entirely blind to the origins of the violence. They did not know where the blood was first spilled. They did not know what specific events precipitated the brutal beating, and they were completely unaware that miles away, the killer's fatal mistake was already waiting for them in the form of a magnetic tape recording inside a bank. The Canhall Road offered no weapons, no distinct footprints, and no immediate witnesses to point them in the right direction. It offered only the battered remains of a young man whose future had been violently stolen and a profound, echoing silence that would frustrate the pursuit of justice for decades. The meticulous work of the forensic team had successfully unmasked the true nature of the crime, tearing away the deceptive veil of a simple fall to reveal the ugly, violent reality of homicide, but in doing so, it vastly expanded the geographic and psychological scope of the investigation. The police were no longer just investigating a localized incident at the Waikele overpass. They were hunting for a ghost who had committed an unspeakable act of violence somewhere in the unknown darkness and then seamlessly vanished back into the fabric of the island. The terrifying lack of a primary crime scene meant that any physical evidence left behind during the actual beating, such as blood spatter, a discarded weapon, or signs of a fierce struggle in the dirt or on a floor, was completely lost to them, leaving a massive blind spot that crippled the early momentum of the case. Detectives had to carefully retrace whatever steps they could, relying on the sparse facts that Gregory was battered, transported, and thrown away, an absolutely heartless sequence that required planning and a vehicle. The realization that the killer drove around the island with a severely beaten victim in their car adds an incredibly dark layer to the narrative, showcasing a perpetrator navigating the normal roads of Oahu while harboring a horrific secret in the passenger seat or the trunk. Every commuter passing them by on the asphalt that night was completely oblivious to the tragedy unfolding just feet away. This level of deception and cold-blooded transportation solidifies the profile of a killer who was not overwhelmed by panic, but rather focused on the methodical elimination of evidence and the secure disposal of the body. They utilized the towering structure of the Waikele overpass not just as a physical dumping ground, but as a deliberate misdirection, hoping the police would look at the height of the bridge and simply close the book on a tragic accident. The killer vastly underestimated the thoroughness of the medical examiner, but they successfully secured a head start, disappearing into the island's population before the true nature of the crime was ever brought to light, leaving behind a profound and agonizing mystery. As the physical investigation at the Waikele overpass encountered the agonizing reality of a secondary disposal site completely devoid of the primary violence, the detectives were forced to rapidly pivot their intense focus from the grim dirt of the Canhall Road to the intricate paper trail of Gregory Yamade's abruptly ended life. When a young person is violently and suddenly removed from the physical world, they inevitably leave behind an invisible but highly traceable tether of administrative and financial connection, a complex network of personal keys, leather wallets, state identification cards, and modern banking accounts that define their existence within the organized system of society. The forensic investigators meticulously cataloging the victim's personal effects at the morgue inevitably discovered a glaring, undeniable, and highly significant absence among the items recovered in the dirt alongside his severely battered body. Gregory's automated teller machine card, a simple rectangular piece of plastic that served as the primary direct conduit to his personal finances and saving, was completely missing from the desolate crime scene beneath the roaring traffic of the H1 freeway. This seemingly small missing item immediately transformed the entire scope of the terrifying case, shifting it from a localized, inexplicable act of brutal physical violence into a crime potentially driven by a very tangible, easily understood motive, suggesting to the seasoned detectives that whoever committed this horrific act might not have been motivated solely by a sudden explosion of blind, uncontrollable rage, but perhaps by a cold, deeply calculating, and deeply sinister desire for financial gain. The immediate realization that the violent killer, or perhaps a closely trusted accomplice, might currently be in possession of the dead young man's bank card injected a sudden, electrifying surge of adrenaline into the stagnant investigation, providing the police department with a fragile, desperately needed thread of hope that the perpetrator would inevitably make a critical, monumental error in criminal judgment. They understood fundamentally that human greed almost always overrides cautious instinct, and they theorized that if the individual currently holding that stolen card attempted to access Gregoria's personal funds, they would be absolutely forced to step out of the protective, anonymous shadows of the island's isolated agricultural underbelly and step directly into the brightly illuminated, technologically monitored grid of the commercial banking system. This intense anticipation set the stage for one of the most chilling, memorable, and ultimately frustrating developments in the long history of the Honolulu Police Department, creating a definitive moment where a brutal murder investigation directly intersected with the nascent, rudimentary surveillance technology of the mid-1980s. The police immediately began contacting local financial institutions, placing a frantic trace on the young man's accounts, hoping against all odds that the perpetrator possessed the sheer audacity to walk into a bank and attempt a cash withdrawal while the true owner of the plastic card was lying dead on a cold medical examiner's table. That desperate investigative hope materialized far faster and with much more chilling precision than anyone in the police department could have possibly anticipated, sending absolute shockwaves through the detective bureau when a definitive electronic ping registered on the victim's compromised financial account. At precisely 13 minutes past 6 o'clock in the evening on September 8th, 1986, on the exact same day that Gregory Yamade's battered remains were discovered hidden beneath the concrete pillars of the Waikila overpass, an unidentified man brazenly walked up to an automated teller machine located at the Waianae branch of the Honolulu Federal Savings and Loan, an institution colloquially known across the island simply as. The sheer timing of this financial transaction is profoundly and deeply unsettling, creating a massive psychological anchor for the entire homicide timeline. Consider the terrifying chronological sequence of that fateful Monday. In the early misty hours of the morning, a devastated young man is found brutally beaten, discarded, and left for dead in the absolute darkness of a forgotten dirt road. Throughout the daylight hours, specialized crime scene technicians carefully process the grim location. Detectives frantically canvass neighborhoods attempting to retrace the victim's final known movements, and a grieving family is inevitably shattered by the delivery of the worst imaginable news. Then, as the evening sun begins to dip below the horizon on that very same day, casting long, dark shadows across the coastal town of Waianae, a completely unknown figure calmly inserts Gregory's personal bank card into a machine and requests cash. This deliberate act represents a level of profound psychological detachment and absolute cold-blooded calculation that disturbed even the most hardened veteran investigators. The suspect standing in front of that machine was actively manipulating the financial assets of a ghost, eagerly stealing from a young man who had been violently erased from existence merely hours prior. The commercial bank's primitive security system dutifully whirred into action, successfully capturing this incredibly brazen act on a reel of magnetic surveillance tape, forever freezing the unknown suspect in a grainy black and white frame of electronic memory. For a brief, shining moment, the detectives assigned to the grueling case firmly believed that they had successfully broken the investigation wide open, thoroughly convinced that this magnetic tape held the ultimate, undeniable key to identifying the ruthless killer who had dumped Gregory Yamada beneath the roaring freeway. They eagerly retrieved the footage from the Hanfed branch, fully expecting to look directly into the eyes of a murderer and bring a swift, decisive end to the tragic nightmare that had befallen the Yamada family. However, the harsh, unforgiving reality of 1980s surveillance technology quickly extinguished that initial spark of investigative optimism, transforming what should have been a definitive piece of conclusive evidence into a perpetually frustrating dead end that would plague the department for decades. In the modern era, society is entirely accustomed to high-definition security cameras capable of capturing the minnow, identifying details of a human face from across a crowded city street, mapping biometric data, and instantly cross-referencing those digital images against massive, interconnected global databases. But in 1986, the camera positioned above the Waianae Han-fed automated teller machine was a rudimentary piece of analog equipment designed primarily to deter casual theft rather than to capture broadcast-quality portraits of violent, fleeing fugitives. The resulting image that the detectives stared at for hours on end was incredibly degraded, consisting of blurry, low-contrast pixels that offered frustratingly ambiguous visual information. The black and white footage successfully confirmed the basic physical presence of a male suspect. It captured the general shape of his upper body, the rough style of the clothing he wore on that particular evening, and the casual, unhurried manner in which he interacted with the banking machine. But it fundamentally failed to capture the one thing the police desperately needed most to close the case. It failed to capture a clear, definitive, and immediately recognizable human identity. The man's facial features were entirely obscured by the poor resolution of the analog tape, the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lighting of the bank's exterior, and the specific downward angle of the camera lens, rendering him as a terrifyingly anonymous phantom. This grainy image represents the agonizing central paradox of the Gregory Yamada investigation. The police possessed undeniable physical, photographic proof of a man directly connected to the victim's stolen property just hours after a brutal homicide. Yet that photograph was completely useless unless someone in the general public already intimately knew the man and could look past the blurry distortion to recognize his specific posture, his unique physical build, or the distinct way he carried himself. If this unknown man had absolutely no prior criminal record, if his fingerprints were not already on file in a dusty police cabinet, and if no one in the Waianae community was willing to step forward and place a permanent name to that ghostly fate, the surveillance tape was completely stripped of its investigative power. The image became a frozen historical artifact, a visual taunt from a suspect who had confidently walked into the light, taken exactly what he wanted from a dead man, and seamlessly vanished back into the vast, anonymous population of the island. The existence of this unidentified man on the bank tape forced the homicide detectives to rapidly develop and meticulously analyze several distinct, deeply troubling theories regarding his specific role in the brutal death of Gregory Yamada, with each scenario presenting its own unique set of insurmountable investigative challenges. The first and most straightforward theory posited that the man captured on the grainy camera was, in fact, the very same individual who committed the brutal physical assault from start to finish. In this chilling scenario, the primary motive for the murder was a devastatingly simple and ruthless robbery. The perpetrator stalked or ambushed Gregory in the dark, overpowered him with extreme physical violence, stripped him of his wallet and identification, and then callously dumped his battered body over the Wekele overpass before driving across the island to Waianae to reap the financial rewards of his horrific crime. If this theory holds true, it suggests a killer completely devoid of human empathy, someone who could literally beat a young man to death and then calmly stand at an automated teller machine hours later without displaying a single ounce of visible panic, remorse, or nervous hesitation. The second compelling theory explored by the detectives suggested a far more insidious and heartbreaking dynamic, proposing the idea that Gregory Yamada was actually lured to his death by someone he personally knew and deeply trusted. In this narrative, there was no random chaotic ambush in the dark. Instead, there was a calculated, quiet betrayal. Gregory might have willingly entered a vehicle or accompanied an acquaintance to a secluded location, completely unaware of the violent intentions harboring within his companion. An argument or a planned robbery rapidly escalated into a fatal beating, and the trusted acquaintance ultimately became the shadowy figure withdrawing cash in the evening light. This theory logically explains how the killer managed to isolate the victim without a massive, highly visible struggle in a public area. But it deepens the tragedy by adding the agonizing element of personal betrayal to the young man's final moments. The third and perhaps most complex theory deeply considered by the police department is the distinct, terrifying possibility that more than one person was actively involved in the orchestration and execution of the crime. The logistics of violently beating a healthy 21-year-old male and hauling his dead weight over a massive concrete barrier strongly suggest the physical presence of multiple attackers working in violent concert. Under this specific theory, the man captured on the bank camera might not have been the individual who delivered the fatal blow. He might simply be a willing accomplice, a participant in the robbery who was tasked with draining the victim's bank accounts, while the primary killer focused entirely on the physical disposal of the body and the destruction of the primary crime scene. This final theory complicates the investigation exponentially, because even if the police miraculously managed to identify the man in the Waianae bank footage, he might simply claim that he found the discarded card on the street, or that it was casually handed to him by a dangerous acquaintance, effectively legally distancing himself from the actual act of murder. Without any physical DNA evidence tying the man in the video directly to the dirt of the Canehall Road, the police could potentially prove financial theft, but proving a premeditated homicide would require a full confession that a hardened criminal was highly unlikely to ever provide. These swirling, complex theories, combined with the catastrophic technological limitations of 1986, ultimately trapped the Honolulu Police Department in a devastating, unbreakable investigative paralyzation. They had the location of the body, they had the undeniable forensic proof of a vicious beating, and they had a photograph of a man holding the victim's property, but they critically lacked the essential connective tissue required to bind these disparate elements into a cohesive, prosecutable case. The unknown man in the surveillance tape became the absolute focal point of the entire tragedy, a silent, faceless suspect who successfully outsmarted the justice system simply by blending into the background. As the weeks turned into agonizing months and the months slowly bled into years, the frantic initial momentum of the Yamada investigation inevitably began to slow down, severely hindered by a lack of fresh leads, the agonizing silence of potential witnesses, and the unyielding, blurry anonymity of the man on the magnetic tape. The investigation reached a heartbreaking plateau, solidifying the terrifying reality that a brutal killer was walking freely among the unsuspecting citizens of Oahu, living a completely unburdened life. While the case files containing the final, violent moments of Gregory Masao Yamada were slowly packed away in the silent archives of the cold case unit, waiting endlessly for a name that seemed as though it would never actually come. The fundamental architecture of the criminal justice system is built upon a deeply ingrained societal promise that violence will ultimately be met with consequence, a comforting narrative that assures us the chaos of a brutal act will eventually be organized, categorized, and resolved within the sterile, authoritative walls of a courtroom. We are collectively conditioned to expect a specific, chronological progression to tragedy, believing that the horrific discovery of a crime scene is merely the turbulent opening chapter of a story that will inevitably conclude with the heavy, definitive strike of a judge's gavel, the solemn reading of a jury's verdict, and the physical incarceration of the perpetrator. This process, with its strict procedural rules, its presentation of physical evidence, and its public display of accountability, is designed to restore a sense of moral balance to a community shattered by violence, offering grieving families a tangible, albeit imperfect, form of closure and a space where the trauma inflicted upon their loved one is officially acknowledged and condemned by the full weight of the law. However, in the deeply unsettling narrative of Gregory Masao Yamada, this promised progression of justice is completely absent, replaced by a profound and suffocating silence that has stretched across nearly 4 decades without a single moment of legal resolution. There has never been a criminal trial to dissect the brutal events of September 8, 1986. No prosecutor has ever stood before a jury to meticulously lay out the timeline of Gregory's final, terrifying hour, and no defense attorney has ever attempted to introduce reasonable doubt into the official record. The imposing wooden doors of the courtroom have remained firmly shut, denying the young victim the dignity of a formal legal reckoning and leaving the horrific circumstances of his death suspended in a perpetual, agonizing state of investigative limbo. The absolute lack of judicial proceedings in this case is not due to a lack of physical violence or a misinterpretation of the law, but rather the devastating, unyielding roadblock created by the unidentified man captured on the Grainy Bank surveillance tape. In the eyes of the law, a criminal prosecution requires a named defendant, a specific human being who can be legally charged, arrested, and brought before a judge to answer for their alleged action. The Honolulu Police Department possessed a photograph of a man who was undeniably, intrinsically linked to the victim's stolen bank card on the very day of the murder, a piece of visual evidence that should have been the cornerstone of a triumphant prosecution. But because they could never legally attach a confirmed identity to that blurry black and white face, the entire apparatus of justice ground to a complete and permanent halt. Without a verified name to type onto an arrest warrant, the system is entirely paralyzed, unable to move forward regardless of how compelling the circumstantial evidence might be. This inability to identify the phantom in the automated teller machine footage transformed a highly active, urgent homicide investigation into a stagnant, profoundly frustrating cold case, initiating an agonizing process of institutional fading that is completely invisible to the general public. When a murder investigation first begins, it consumes the entire operational capacity of a detective bureau, dominating daily briefings, generating massive amounts of paperwork, and drawing upon every available departmental resource in a frantic, adrenaline-fueled race against time. But as the weeks slowly turn into months, and every single investigative lead inevitably terminates at the same grainy photograph of an unknown man, that initial momentum begins to rapidly dissipate. The active case file, once the center of intense daily scrutiny, is gradually moved to the side of a detective's desk to make room for newer, fresher tragedies that demand immediate attention, reflecting the harsh reality that violence never stops and law enforcement must constantly triage the unending flow of human cruelty. The phone calls from potential tipsters slowly dry up, the neighborhood canvases cease, and the memory of the young man found beneath the Waikala overpass begins to fade from the immediate consciousness of the local community. The transition of a file from an active, breathing investigation into a dormant, archival cold case is not a sudden, dramatic event, but rather a slow, quiet surrender to the overwhelming passage of time and the terrifying reality that a killer has successfully evaded capture. The psychological burden placed upon the homicide detectives who originally worked the Yamada case is immense and enduring, representing a unique type of professional trauma that stems from the agonizing proximity to a solution that remained perpetually out of reach. These investigators are trained to find the missing puzzle pieces, to connect disparate facts into a cohesive narrative of guilt, and they were fully aware that the perpetrator had made a arrogant mistake by utilizing the stolen bank card in a public location. They had the visual proof of that mistake. They could literally see the suspect interacting with the machine, yet they were fundamentally powerless to exploit it, forced to stare endlessly at a photograph that offered a face but adamantly refused to yield an identity. The grainy image of the man at the Waianae Hanfed branch becomes an insidious, haunting presence in the minds of the investigators, a visual taunt from a suspect who confidently walked into the artificial light, took exactly what he wanted from a deceased young man, and then seamlessly evaporated back into the vast, anonymous population of the Hawaiian Islands without leaving a single actionable trace. The deep freeze of this investigation also forces us to confront a terrifying and deeply uncomfortable societal reality regarding the continued existence of the perpetrator. Because there was no arrest, no trial, and no conviction, the individual responsible for the brutal beating and callous disposal of a 21-year-old man simply walked away from the Cane Hall Road and immediately reintegrated into the normal, everyday fabric of society. This is the most chilling aspect of any cold case, the absolute certainty that a violent killer was allowed to continue living an entirely unburdened, uninterrupted life, completely shielded by a terrifying veil of anonymity. The man who hurled Gregory over the massive concrete barrier of the H1 freeway likely went to work the next morning, paid his taxes, interacted with unsuspecting neighbor, and drove his vehicle on the very same asphalt arteries that passed directly above the hidden dirt path where his victim's body was discovered. He walked through grocery store aisles, stood in lines at the post office, and perhaps even established a family of his own, all while harboring a horrific, incredibly violent secret that he successfully managed to keep hidden from the entire world. The absolute lack of consequence for such an extreme act of violence creates a profound sense of moral vertigo, a terrifying realization that the systems designed to protect society and punish cruelty can be completely circumvented by sheer luck, the limitations of analog technology, and the overwhelming silence of those who might know the truth. The burden of this unresolved tragedy falls most heavily upon the family and loved ones of Gregory Yamada, who are forced to navigate the rest of their natural lives carrying the agonizing weight of an unfinished story. For them, the lack of a courtroom trial means there is absolutely no official space to direct their anger, no public forum to demand answers, and no structural mechanism to force the killer to confront the devastating emotional wreckage he left in his wake. Every single time they venture out into the local community, they are subjected to the psychological torture of wondering if the anonymous face passing them on the sidewalk, standing next to them in an elevator, or waiting behind them in a checkout line belongs to the very man who callously stole Gregory's future. The island of Oahu, with its finite geographic boundaries and interconnected communities, transforms into a psychological minefield where any stranger of a certain age could theoretically be the phantom captured on the bank surveillance tape. They are forced to live with the excruciating knowledge that the killer might still be walking the exact same streets, enjoying the tropical sun and the island breeze, while their son remains frozen in time as a 21-year-old victim of an unsolved crime. The passage of nearly 40 years does absolutely nothing to diminish the specific horror of that realization. In fact, the relentless march of time only compounds the tragedy, adding layers of dust to the archival boxes containing Gregory's file, while the killer is afforded the immense privilege of growing old, a privilege he violently and intentionally stripped away from his victim. The complete absence of justice in this narrative serves as a stark, unforgiving reminder of the inherent vulnerabilities within the investigative process and the devastating power of a secret kept hidden in the dark, leaving behind a profound, echoing silence where the righteous finality of a gavel strike was supposed to be. The passage of time in the realm of unsolved homicides is an insidious and complicated force, possessing the paradoxical power to simultaneously dull the sharp immediacy of a tragedy while compounding its profound, agonizing weight. When days stretch into weeks, and those weeks slowly assemble into decades, the vibrant world that once surrounded a crime gradually transforms, shedding its original skin and replacing its foundational elements with modern replacements that bear little resemblance to the past. The physical landscape of the island of Oahu has shifted dramatically since that dark morning in 1986, with old sugarcane fields being paved over by sprawling commercial centers, suburban neighborhoods expanding into once barren valleys, and the historic Can Hall roads disappearing beneath layers of fresh asphalt and unyielding concrete. The technology that governed human life during that era has undergone an absolute revolution, moving from analog tapes and physical card catalogs to an omnipresent digital reality where every movement is tracked, recorded, and instantly analyzed by sophisticated algorithms. Yet, amidst this relentless march of progress, the unresolved death of Gregory Masao Yamada has remained completely suspended in time, an open wound on the collective conscience of the community that refuses to heal despite the decades that have gathered over it like fine island dust. The young man who was brutally beaten and discarded beneath the Waikala overpass remains forever 21 years old, preserved in the prime of his youth within a fading collection of police reports, while the world he left behind continues to spin forward without him. The investigative files belonging to the Honolulu Police Department have aged alongside the investigators who first opened them, their typed pages turning brittle and their black and white photographs losing their contrast. But the moral imperative to discover the truth has never entirely dissipated. The passage of nearly 40 years does not diminish the value of a stolen human life, nor does it grant an expiration date to the profound suffering inflicted upon a family that was denied the fundamental human right to understand why their loved one was violently taken from them. In an effort to confront this heavy accumulation of unresolved history, the Honolulu Police Department established the Ao Poina initiative in 2008, choosing a Hawaiian phrase that translates directly and powerfully to never forgotten. This specialized project was created not as a mere symbolic gesture, but as a deliberate and structured effort to systematically re-examine the vast repository of cold cases dating back to the 1960s, applying modern perspectives and renewed investigative vigor to files that had long sat dormant in the archive. Gregory Yomade's name was prominently included in this initiative, serving as a solemn institutional declaration that his life still mattered and that the department refused to let his memory simply dissolve into the background of historical statistics. The philosophy driving Ao Poina is rooted in a fundamental truth about human nature and the shifting dynamics of social relationships over extended period. The allegiances, friendships, and fears that bind people to silence in the immediate aftermath of a brutal crime are rarely permanent structures. They are fragile, evolving bonds that frequently erode under the immense pressure of the passing year. People who were once desperately afraid of retaliation may now find themselves in positions of absolute safety, free to speak without fear of retribution. Individuals who once felt an intense, misplaced loyalty to a violent friend or romantic partner may have experienced profound falling outs, divorces, or shifts in moral clarity that leave them willing to finally unburden their consciences. Most critically, the heavy psychological weight of harboring a terrible secret for 30 or 40 years can become entirely unbearable, driving individuals toward a desperate need for personal redemption before their own time on this earth comes to an end. The police understand that somewhere on the island, or perhaps living quietly on the mainland, there is very likely a living person who knows precisely what occurred on the night of September 8th, 1986, an individual who was told a frantic secret in confidence, who witnessed a suspicious vehicle return in the dark, or who recognized the distinct silhouette of a family member standing before that automated teller machine in Waianae. This persistent belief in the power of public memory and the shifting tide of time led to a significant development in 2021, when the Honolulu Police Department took the dramatic step of publicly re-releasing the surveillance footage from the 1986 Han-Fed Bank branch, a move extensively covered by local media outlets such as Hawaii News Net. After more than 35 years of silence, the grainy black and white image of the unknown man utilizing Gregory Yomade's stolen bank card was once again broadcast across television screens, digital newsfeed, and social media platforms throughout the islands. The strategy behind this public appeal was deceptively simple, yet profoundly hopeful, relying on the possibility that a fresh set of eyes, or perhaps an older set of eyes viewed through the lens of accumulated life experience, might finally bridge the impossible gap that had crippled the original investigation. A person viewing that photograph in 1986 might have brushed it off as an unrecognizable blur. But that same individual looking at the image today, armed with decades of memories regarding how a specific acquaintance walked, the unique broadness of their shoulders, or the distinct way they tilted their head when concentrating, might experience a sudden, undeniable flash of terrifying recognition. The reemergence of this haunting image into the public consciousness served as a stark reminder that the killer, or at the very least, a key material witness to a brutal homicide, had potentially walked among the general public for over 3 decades without ever facing a single moment of legal accountability. It forced the entire community of Oahu to confront the chilling reality that the phantom captured on that analog tape was not an abstract monster, but a flesh and blood human being who had lived an entire lifetime under a cloak of stolen anonymity, enjoying the warmth of the sun, the love of family, and the ordinary pleasures of existence that were violently ripped away from Gregory Yamada on a dark dirt road in Waka. As we examine this enduring tragedy through the reflective lens of the present day, the entire case ultimately coalesces around 5 profound, unanswered questions that continue to define its agonizing legacy and challenge the limits of modern justice. The first and most critical question is the undeniable mystery of the man in the camera, the identity of the individual who calmly stood in the fluorescent light of the Waianae Bank at 13 minutes past 6 o'clock on the day of the murder. Who was he? Where did he come from? And what was his exact relationship, if any, to the 21-year-old victim whose financial assets he was actively attempting to drain? The second lingering question concerns the precise chain of custody regarding the stolen automated teller machine card itself, demanding to know how this specific piece of plastic traveled from Gregory S. possession to the hands of the man on the tape. Did the unknown suspect personally strip the card from the victim's battered body during the violent struggle? Or was the card passed to him in the chaotic aftermath of the killing by another party who orchestrated the violence, creating a complex web of complicity that remains entirely untangled? The third question forces us to look beyond the secondary disposal site beneath the H1 freeway and ask where the primary crime scene was actually located. Where on the island of Oahu did Gregory Yamada spend his final conscious moments fighting for his life? And what physical evidence of that violent altercation remains forever lost in a location that investigators have never been able to identify? The fourth question addresses the physical mechanics and logistical brutality of the crime, probing whether this horrific act was the work of a single, exceptionally powerful, and desperate individual, or the coordinated effort of multiple perpetrators who worked together to overpower, beat, transport, and ultimately heave a full-grown young man over the concrete barrier of the overpass. Finally, the fifth and most agonizing question is why this perpetrator has managed to completely evade capture for nearly 4 decades, outsmarting the justice system and leaving behind an enduring mystery that defies every modern expectation of closure and accountability. The story of Gregory Masao Yamada serves as a somber, deeply moving monument to the fragile nature of human existence and the haunting reality of the cold cases that linger in the shadows of our society. On September 8, 1986, a bright young man stood on the threshold of a promising future, his entire life stretching out before him like an open ocean, only to have that potential violently extinguished in a matter of terrifying moments by human cruelty. He was beaten, discarded beneath a roaring concrete highway, and left in the dirt of a forgotten can haul road, while the individual responsible simply walked away into the light, utilizing the victim's own property before disappearing completely into the vast, anonymous crowds of an island paradise. The existence of that single, grainy surveillance photograph remains both the greatest asset and the most profound tragedy of the entire investigation, a visual reminder that the truth was once within reach, yet slipped through the fingers of the law due to the insurmountable limitations of an earlier technological era. As the years continue to accumulate and the physical world moves ever further from the 1980s, the Honolulu Police Department continues to hold the door open for justice, maintaining Gregory S. file within the active cold case registry and waiting for the one piece of information that will finally bring this long nightmare to an end. The silence that has enveloped this case for nearly 40 years is not a sign of peace, but a heavy, unnatural vacuum that can only be filled by the truth, until the day arrives when that grainy face on the magnetic tape is finally given a definitive name. Gregory Yamada will remain forever young, forever frozen in the prime of his 21 years, and forever waiting for the justice that was so cruelly stolen from him beneath the Waikil overpass. Let's talk about the geography of evasion. When a violent crime is committed on a vast, interconnected continental landmass, the perpetrator possesses the immediate geographical luxury of endless highways, stretching across state lines and dissolving into thousands of distant, anonymous cities where they have no history and leave no recognizable footprint. But the island of Oahu is a fundamentally different environment, a profoundly isolated ecosystem surrounded on all sides by thousands of miles of deep, unforgiving Pacific Ocean. This geographical isolation creates a unique psychological and investigative paradox for a cold case of this magnitude. If the unidentified man captured on the grainy Waianae Bank surveillance tape did not immediately board a commercial flight and flee across the ocean in the chaotic days following the discovery of Gregory Yamade's battered body, then he was geographically trapped within the very same confined perimeter as the homicide detectives who were desperately hunting him. He was forced to navigate the exact same limited network of island roads, shop at the same local markets, and exist within the same interconnected community framework as the grieving family of the young man he either killed or helped to rob. The terrifying reality of an unsolved island homicide is that the killer cannot truly disappear into the ether. They can only blend into the immediate background, hiding in plain sight among a population where degrees of separation are notoriously small. This means that for nearly 4 decades, the phantom of the Waikoloa overpass has likely been a functioning participant in the daily life of Hawaii, a silent predator who successfully masked his violent past behind the mundane routines of everyday existence. He has aged alongside the island, his physical appearance slowly drifting away from the blurry black and white image recorded in 1986, growing older, perhaps gray, and blending ever more seamlessly into the respected ranks of the community's elders. This geographical confinement amplifies the tragedy because it guarantees that the killer has continuously enjoyed the profound beauty of the island, the warmth of its sun, and the rhythm of its seasons, all the fundamental human experiences that were violently and permanently stolen from Gregory when he was only 21 years old. The island, in its breathtaking beauty, has unwittingly served as a sanctuary for a monster holding the secret of that dark September night, deep within its valleys and bustling city streets. Yet, the relentless passage of time that has allowed this perpetrator to hide in plain sight also brings with it the slow, inexorable advancement of scientific discovery, offering a faint but persistent beacon of hope that the dark veil covering this case might eventually be pierced. Back in 1986, the investigative toolkit available to the Honolulu Police Department was largely limited to fingerprints, basic blood typing, eyewitness testimonies, and rudimentary analog surveillance technology that ultimately failed to provide a definitive identity. When investigators meticulously collected the physical evidence from the desolate dirt of the Canhall Road, they were searching for macroscopic clues. A dropped weapon, a distinct shoe print, or a visible trace of blood belonging to the attack. They possessed absolutely no concept of the microscopic revolution that would eventually transform the entire landscape of criminal justice. Today, the field of forensic science is dominated by the incredible power of advanced DNA profiling, genetic genealogy, and the ability to extract identifying biological markers from the most minuscule degraded fragments of cellular material. This scientific evolution completely recontextualizes the physical evidence that was gathered at the Waikoloa overpass nearly 40 years ago. While the Honolulu Police Department has not publicly disclosed the exact nature of the biological evidence preserved in Gregory Yamade's archival file, the sheer physical brutality of the crime strongly suggests that an exchange of microscopic material was virtually inevitable. A severe, sustained physical beating is an inherently intimate and messy act of violence, requiring close physical proximity and significant exertion. If the killeress's sweat, skin cells, or blood were transferred onto Gregory as clothing during the terrifying struggle that preceded his fatal plunge over the concrete barrier, and if those garments were properly dried, sealed, and preserved in a climate-controlled evidence locker, they represent an incredibly powerful ticking time bomb for the perpetrator. The man who confidently used the stolen automated teller machine card believed he had successfully outsmarted the police because his face was hidden by the poor resolution of a camera, completely unaware that he might have left a microscopic map of his own genetic code on the victim's body. The potential initial application of modern genetic genealogy to this decades-old evidence creates a terrifying new reality for the killer, a reality where their identity can be systematically traced not through their own immediate actions, but through the distant, innocent genetic connections of their unsuspecting relatives, a web of biological truth that no amount of silence or geographical hiding can ever defeat. This intersection of advancing technology and the relentless ticking of the clock brings us to the profound psychological burden carried by those who exist on the very periphery of this horrific crime, the silent witnesses who possess the critical missing pieces of the puzzle but have chosen, for whatever complex reasons, to keep their mouths firmly shut. A secret of this magnitude, the knowledge of a brutal murder and the subsequent theft of a dead man's property, is not a passive piece of information. It is a heavy, corrosive weight that actively degrades the human soul over time. The individual who recognizes the man in the Waianae bank footage, the person who noticed a friend washing blood out of a vehicle in the early hours of September 8, or the confidant who listened to a drunken, guilt-ridden confession years after the fact, has been forced to carry the devastating psychological baggage of Gregory Yamade's death for almost 40 years. In the immediate aftermath of the homicide, their silence might have been dictated by a primal, paralyzing fear of violent retaliation, a deep-seated loyalty to a troubled family member, or a misguided belief that the police would eventually solve the case on their own without requiring their dangerous intervention. But as the decades have relentlessly marched forward, the foundational architecture of those early justifications has inevitably crumbled. The terrifying individuals who commanded fear in the 1980s are now elderly, frail, or perhaps even deceased. The blind loyalties of youth have been tempered and dissolved by the harsh realities and profound losses of adulthood. The silent witness is now left standing entirely alone with their conscience, approaching the twilight of their own life and facing the terrifying prospect of carrying this dark, unresolved trauma with them to the grave. The Honolulu Police Department's persistent efforts to keep this case in the public eye, specifically through the strategic re-release of the bank surveillance footage in 2021, are directly targeted at this specific psychological vulnerability. They are offering these silent burden carriers a final fleeting opportunity for moral redemption, a chance to shed the agonizing weight of their long-held secret and provide a grieving family with the answers they have been desperately seeking for generations. The appeal is not just a call for legal justice. It is a profound plea for fundamental human decency, a request for someone to finally look at the frozen image of that 21-year-old victim and decide that his right to the truth outweighs the killer's right to continued anonymity. As we cast our final gaze upon the tragic, unresolved narrative of Gregory Masao Yamada, we are forced to confront the chilling permanence of his loss and the enduring ghostly presence of the man who walked away from the shadows of the H1 freeway. The juxtaposition of these two figures defines the absolute heartbreak of the cold case phenomenon. Gregory remains eternally young, his life permanently anchored to that dark Monday in 1986, his ambitions, his dreams, and his future entirely erased by a sudden, inexplicable explosion of violence. He is remembered in the fading photographs held by his family in the quiet, solemn spaces of the island's cemeteries and in the enduring, sterile documents of an open police file. In stark, sickening contrast, the unidentified man captured by the Han-fed security camera has been permitted to traverse the vast expanse of time that was stolen from his victim. He has witnessed the turning of a new millennium, experienced the profound technological transformations of the modern world, and navigated the complex, beautiful journey of a full human life, all while a grainy, black and white reflection of his darkest moment sits patiently in an archival box, waiting to finally consume him. This horrific imbalance of fate is what demands our continued attention and justifies the Honolulu Police Department's refusal to simply close the book on this agonizing mystery. The act of remembering Gregory Yamada, of repeatedly broadcasting the details of his final hours and the blurry image of the primary suspect is an act of profound defiance against the crushing weight of time and the arrogant complacency of a killer who believes he has permanently escaped consequence. It is a steadfast declaration that a human life cannot be violently discarded in the dirt of a forgotten Cane Hall road and simply forgotten by the passage of decades. The truth of what happened in the dark spaces beneath the Wackle overpass still exists, locked within the microscopic remnants of physical evidence, hidden within the aging memory of a silent witness, and concealed behind the unrecognizable face of a man who thought the night would hide his sins forever, until that truth is finally excavated from the past and brought into the unforgiving light of a courtroom. The story of Gregory Masao Yamada will remain a haunting, open wound on the beautiful island of Oahu, a perpetual reminder that justice delayed is an agony that echoes endlessly across the generations, waiting patiently for the day when the ghost in the machine is finally given a name. The initiative A. Ol Poina, which serves as the guiding principle for the investigators still working this case today, transcends mere police procedure and enters the realm of a sacred societal vow. It signifies an institutional refusal to accept defeat in the face of insurmountable odds, acknowledging that while the original detectives may have retired and the physical landscape of the crime scene may have been irrevocably altered by urban development, the moral obligation to the victim remains entirely unchanged. Every single time a new investigator pulls the Yamada file from the shelf, they are renewing that solemn vow, bringing fresh perspective and modern analytical techniques to a puzzle that has frustrated brilliant minds for nearly 40 years. They scrutinize the edges of that analog bank photograph, searching for some previously unnoticed detail, a subtle shadow, or a faint reflection that might somehow trigger a breakthrough. They review the dusty transcripts of early interviews, looking for the tiny, almost imperceptible inconsistencies in a statement that might indicate a witness was holding back crucial information out of fear or misplaced loyalty. This relentless, meticulous dedication ensures that the killer can never truly rest in absolute peace, even if they have convinced themselves that they have successfully outrun their violent past. They must live with the perpetual, terrifying knowledge that somewhere in a sterile room in Honolulu, there are dedicated professionals actively working to dismantle their entire life of deception. The specter of discovery is a constant, invisible companion, a shadow that lengthens with every passing year and every new advancement in forensic science. The ultimate resolution of this case may not come from a dramatic, cinematic courtroom confrontation, but rather from a quiet, late-night phone call from an elderly witness seeking peace, or a sterile laboratory report definitively matching a microscopic trace of genetic material to a distant relative. Regardless of how the breakthrough eventually arrives, the overarching message remains incredibly clear and undeniably powerful in its delivery. The passage of time does not grant absolution for murder. Gregory Yamada's stolen future demands an accounting, and the island that witnessed his tragic end will continue to hold the space for his justice, waiting with infinite patience for the truth to finally step out of the darkness and shatter the agonizing silence of the past. The island of Oahu is a landscape defined by its breathtaking natural boundaries, a place where the towering volcanic ridges meet the vast, unyielding expanse of the Pacific Ocean, creating a deeply interconnected society where absolute anonymity is traditionally a fleeting illusion. In such a confined and intimate geographic space, the existence of an unsolved brutal homicide operates as a slow-acting, corrosive poison within the collective psyche of the community. When a young man like Gregory Masao Yamada is violently erased from the world and his killer seamlessly dissolves back into the local population, the tragedy ceases to be an isolated incident and mutates into a permanent, communal scar. The residents of the island are forced to subconsciously integrate the terrifying reality that a predator is living among them, masked by the comforting banality of everyday life. The Cane Hall Road beneath the Waikele overpass transforms in the local imagination from a mere remnant of the agricultural past into a monument of unpunished evil, a physical reminder of the limitations of human justice. For decades, drivers navigating the roaring lanes of the H1 freeway have unknowingly passed directly over the exact airspace where a 21-year-old's battered body was callously discarded into the shadow. The sheer volume of this daily oblivious traffic stands in devastating contrast to the silent, static nature of the cold case file sitting in the police archive. This geographic proximity to unresolved trauma fundamentally alters the atmosphere of the community, embedding a subtle but persistent layer of suspicion into the mundane interactions of daily existence. The man captured on the bank surveillance tape interacting with the automated teller machine in YNA at 13 minutes past 6 o'clock on that fateful September evening became an invisible specter haunting the island. He is the stranger sitting in the adjacent booth at the local diner, the unidentified vehicle trailing just a little too closely on a dark coastal highway, and the nameless face lost in the crowd of a bustling Honolulu market. The profound terror of the Gregory Yamada case lies not just in the savage brutality of the physical beating, but in the enduring, agonizing uncertainty it injected into an island paradise, proving that the most dangerous monsters do not lurk in the fictional shadows, but rather stand right beside us in the harsh fluorescent lighting of a commercial bank. To comprehend the psychological endurance required to maintain such a horrific secret for nearly 4 decades, one must delve into the chilling duality of a perpetrator who successfully evades the massive apparatus of a modern homicide investigation. The human mind is inherently designed to seek connection, to confess its burdens, and to buckle under the immense pressure of profound guilt. Yet the unidentified man utilizing Gregory's stolen financial property has demonstrated an absolutely terrifying capacity for psychological compartmentalization. He committed or intimately participated in an act of extreme physical violence that ended a young man's life, transported a battered body to the edge of a massive concrete structure, and then successfully transitioned back into the role of a normal, functioning citizen without ever fracturing under the weight of his own monstrous action. This requires a level of emotional detachment that defies ordinary human comprehension. He did not flee the island in a frantic, guilt-ridden panic. Instead, the evidence suggests he simply retreated into the rhythmic anonymity of his existing life, trusting that the abysmal resolution of a 1986 security camera would serve as an impenetrable shield against the absolute full force of the law. As the initial waves of police canvassing subsided and the media coverage of the grim discovery at the Wakala overpass slowly faded from the evening news broadcasts, this individual essentially watched the world move on from his crime, experiencing the dark, intoxicating thrill of absolute impunity. He has been granted the extraordinary privilege of watching the decades unfold, witnessing the transition of the 20th century into the 21st, perhaps raising children and holding grandchildren, all while possessing the undeniable knowledge that he fundamentally denied Gregory Yamada those exact same fundamental human experiences. He has lived a stolen timeline, constructing a completely fraudulent existence built directly upon the hidden foundation of a brutal murder. Yet, this extended evasion is also a self-imposed psychological prison. Every time a police cruiser passes him on the street, every time a local news station broadcasts a retrospective segment on island cold cases, and particularly when the Honolulu Police Department re-released his blurry image to the public, he is violently forced to confront the fragile, precarious nature of his freedom. He must live with the perpetual, exhausting paranoia that his carefully constructed facade could shatter at any given moment, destroyed by a sudden advancement in forensic science, a slip of the tongue during a drunken conversation, or the awakening conscience of an aging accomplice who finally decides that the truth is more important than a decades-old loyalty. While the perpetrator navigates the complex, paranoid architecture of his unearned freedom, the family of Gregory Yamada is fundamentally trapped in a devastating emotional purgatory that entirely defies the natural progression of grief. In a standard tragedy, the passage of time serves as a gentle, eroding force, slowly smoothing the jagged edges of a sudden loss and allowing a family to gradually integrate the absence of their loved one into a new, albeit altered, version of reality. However, The complete lack of answers, accountability, and legal resolution in this specific homicide actively prevents that crucial healing process from ever truly beginning. For nearly 40 years, Gregory S. loved ones have been forced to exist in a perpetual state of agonizing suspension, holding on to the memories of a vibrant 21-year-old while simultaneously grappling with the horrific, unanswered questions surrounding his final, terrifying hours in the dark. They are denied the basic, fundamental right to know exactly where he was attacked, why he was targeted, and who possesses the sheer cruelty required to beat a young man and toss him over a highway barrier like discarded refuse. Every significant family milestone, every holiday gathering, and every passing birthday is permanently shadowed by his profound, unnatural absence, creating an empty space at the table that simply cannot be filled or rationalized. The trauma they endure is entirely cyclical, constantly reignited by the passing anniversaries of September 8th and the periodic, hopeful resurgences of the police investigation that ultimately fail to yield the final piece of the puzzle. They have watched an entire generation grow up, age, and pass away, all while the case file detailing the violent end of Gregory S. life remains frustratingly open, a stark reminder of a promise of justice that the universe has thus far refused to fulfill. The agonizing reality for the family is that they must share the very same island with the ghost who destroyed their world, constantly wondering if they have ever unknowingly crossed paths with the man who held Gregory S.'s stolen bank card. This psychological torture is the invisible, collateral damage of a cold case, a silent, bleeding wound that society rarely acknowledges but which the family must endure every single day. Their enduring grace and quiet resilience in the face of such profound, decades-long injustice stands as a powerful testament to the enduring strength of human love, fiercely keeping Gregory's memory alive in a world that has otherwise failed to provide him with the reckoning he so deeply deserved. The profound frustration of this enduring mystery is deeply shared by the generations of law enforcement officers within the Honolulu Police Department who have inherited the Gregory Yamada file, transforming a 1986 homicide into a multi-generational crusade for truth. The detectives who originally arrived at the desolate Cane Hall Road beneath the H1 freeway operated in an entirely different era of criminal investigation, relying on physical shoe prints, blood typing, and the slow, methodical process of knocking on doors to build their cases. When they obtained the surveillance tape from the Waianae branch, they truly believed they held the definitive key to solving the murder, completely unaware that the severe technological limitations of the magnetic tape would ultimately serve as the killeress' greatest defense. As those original investigators eventually retired, handing in their badges, carrying the heavy, unresolved weight of the Yamada case into their personal civilian lives, a new generation of detectives took up the mantle, bringing with them the immense power of modern forensic science and digital analysis. Through contemporary cold case initiatives, these modern investigators refuse to let the brutal acts of the past be buried by the sheer momentum of time, systematically reviewing the aging physical evidence and applying advanced scientific techniques that the original detectives could never have possibly imagined. They understand that while the physical landscape of Oahu has changed and the Cane Hall roads have faded into memory, the biological and digital footprints left behind by a killer are far more resilient than concrete or asphalt. The public re-release of the suspect's image was a highly calculated strategic maneuver designed to leverage the interconnected power of modern social media and digital broadcasting, directly challenging the killer's assumption of permanent anonymity. The police department's unwavering dedication to this specific cold case is a powerful institutional declaration that the passage of 35 or 40 years does absolutely nothing to diminish the severity of a stolen life. It sends a chilling, persistent message directly to the perpetrator, wherever he may be hiding, that the investigation is not a dormant relic of the past, but a living, breathing entity that continues to hunt him through the archive, through the laboratories, and through the shifting memories of the island community. The detectives remain steadfastly committed to the belief that the perfect crime is an absolute myth, and that even the most disciplined, secretive killer inevitably leaves behind a single, microscopic thread that, when finally pulled, will unravel their entire decades-long deception and bring a long-awaited resolution to the shadows of the Wakala overpass. There is a deeply unsettling power contained within the precise measurement of time when it intersects with a tragic human event. When we consider the timestamp of 6:13 in the evening on September 8, 1986, we are not merely looking at an abstract number recorded on a piece of financial paperwork. We are staring directly at the exact chronological moment when the profound cruelty of a brutal murder collided with the absolute, banal normalcy of everyday administrative life. The Honolulu Federal Savings and Loan Branch in Waianae was likely nearing the end of its operational day, the fading tropical sun casting long, stretched shadows across the asphalt parking lot, while ordinary citizens went about the mundane business of depositing paychecks, checking balances, and securing cash for their evening activities. Into this profoundly ordinary suburban landscape stepped a man carrying the financial identity of a ghost. The automated teller machine, a marvel of modern convenience for that era, was entirely blind to the moral weight of the transaction it was being asked to process. It did not know that the piece of plastic being inserted into its mechanical slot had been violently separated from a 21-year-old boy who was currently lying dead in the dirt beneath the Wakala overpass. It simply read the magnetic strip, verified the numbers, and faithfully executed the command of the user. This chilling intersection between a cold, unfeeling machine and a ruthless, calculating human predator perfectly encapsulates the terrifying reality of the Gregory Yamada case. The killer utilized the sterile, automated systems of society to seamlessly transition from an act of savage, intimate physical violence in the isolated shadows to a quiet, anonymous financial crime in the public light. The juxtaposition is absolutely staggering, forcing us to reconcile the image of a man capable of beating a youth to death and hauling his body over a concrete barrier with the image of that very same individual calmly pressing buttons on a key, waiting patiently for a machine to dispense cash. This is the banality of evil made entirely manifest on a grainy security tape, demonstrating how easily the most horrific acts can be camouflaged by the protective camouflage of routine societal behavior. The existence of that surveillance footage also compels us to examine the intricate, labyrinthine psychology of the people who might be tangentially connected to this crime, the individuals who exist in the dangerous periphery of the killer's life. We must consider the profound burden placed upon a spouse, a sibling, or a close confidant who may have noticed something terribly wrong on that specific Monday in 1986. Perhaps they witnessed the suspect return home with unexplained scratches, bruised knuckles, or clothing heavily soiled with dirt and blood that could not be easily explained away by a hard day of legitimate labor. Perhaps they noticed a sudden, inexplicable influx of cash, or observed a deep, paranoid change in the suspect's demeanor whenever the evening news broadcasted the grim discovery beneath the H1 freeway. The human capacity for denial is incredibly powerful, especially when confronting the terrifying possibility that someone we love and share our lives with is capable of committing an ultimate atrocity. A family member might have instinctively buried their suspicions, desperately choosing to accept a flimsy lie, rather than actively dismantle their entire world by acknowledging the presence of a murderer in their own home. However, as the years steadily compound into decades, the protective walls of that initial denial must inevitably begin to crumble. The suspect they protected has aged, their physical strength has waned, and the intimidating presence that once commanded silent obedience has likely diminished. The silent observer is left entirely alone with the corrosive weight of a terrible truth, watching the Yamada family suffer through decades of unanswered grief, while the perpetrator escapes completely unpunished. The Honolulu Police Department's unwavering persistence, highlighted by their repeated public appeals, is strategically designed to exploit this inevitable psychological erosion. They are sending a clear, resonant message into the community that loyalty to a violent criminal is a toxic, destructive bond that ultimately poisons the soul of the person keeping the secret. They are providing a necessary, anonymous pathway for these burdened individuals to finally step out of the dark and unburden themselves, allowing the truth to finally surface and break the agonizing stalemate that has paralyzed the investigation for nearly 40 years. When we speak of justice in the context of a cold case that has lingered for almost 4 decades, we are forced to entirely redefine our expectations of what a resolution actually looks like. The traditional cinematic vision of justice involves a dramatic arrest, a swift trial, and the immediate incarceration of a dangerous criminal, effectively removing a current threat from the street. But in the case of Gregory Yamada, the timeline stretches so far into the past that the primary goal of the investigation fundamentally shifts. The objective is no longer merely about preventing the killer from striking again, as their capacity for violence may have entirely evaporated with old age, but rather about the profound moral necessity of setting the historical record straight. The community of Oahu requires this resolution not just for immediate public safety, but to heal a deep, structural wound in its collective memory. A society cannot truly claim to value human life if it allows the violent destruction of a 21-year-old boy to be permanently filed away as an unsolvable mystery. Securing an identity for the man in the Waiane bank footage is an act of reclaiming the truth from the destructive grip of time. It is a powerful declaration that every single human life has an inherent, unalienable value that does not diminish or expire simply because the calendar pages continue to turn. Even if the perpetrator is ultimately discovered to have passed away, escaping the physical confines of a prison cell through the inevitability of natural death, the identification itself remains a monumental victory for the investigators and the family. A posthumous identification officially strips the killer of the anonymity they fought so desperately to maintain, officially attaching their name to their horrific actions and ensuring that history remembers them not as an elusive phantom, but as a cowardly murderer who preyed upon the vulnerable. This form of historical justice provides the Yamada family with the definitive answers they have spent a lifetime waiting for, allowing them to finally replace the agonizing void of uncertainty with the concrete reality of the truth, regardless of how painful that truth might be to uncover. As the golden sun continues to set slowly over the magnificent, jagged volcanic ridges of the beautiful island home, casting long shadows across the modern highways that have entirely replaced the old Cane Hall Road, the memory of Gregory Masao Yamada remains a silent, steadfast presence in the fading light. We must strip away the clinical, procedural language of the cold case file and remember him simply as a young man who was fundamentally robbed of his right to experience the vast, unpredictable beauty of a full human existence. He was denied the opportunity to fall in love, to travel beyond the shores of his island home, to build a career, and to eventually grow old surrounded by the comforting embrace of his own family. All of these beautiful, ordinary possibilities were violently extinguished in the dark dirt beneath a concrete bridge, replaced entirely by an agonizing mystery that has stretched across multiple generations. The utterly unidentified man captured by the remote bank surveillance camera remains the single, enduring barrier standing between Gregory and the piece of a finalized narrative. That grainy black and white image is a haunting reflection of our own societal vulnerabilities, a terrifying reminder that evil can occasionally slip through the cracks of the justice system and walk freely among us, safely cloaked in the protective armor of poor analog resolution and the devastating silence of the community. Yet the story is not entirely finished, and the very final chapter has not yet been definitively written. The dedicated investigators of the Honolulu Police Department continue to stand watch over Gregory's file, armed with the incredible advancements of modern forensic science and fueled by a moral obligation that transcends the passage of time. They are waiting patiently for the inevitable moment when the intricate web of deception finally breaks, when a microscopic trace of genetic material yields a name, or when a burdened conscience finally shatters the decades of silence. Until that day finally arrives, the story of Gregory Masao Yamada serves as a profound, heartbreaking plea to the collective conscience of humanity, urging us to never forget the victims of the past, to relentlessly pursue the truth regardless of the obstacles, and to firmly believe even the deepest, darkest secrets hidden in the shadows of the island will eventually be brought into the unforgiving light of ultimate justice. The concept of closure is often presented as a neat and tidy emotional destination that families of murder victims can eventually reach if the justice system functions exactly as it is designed to operate. It implies a definitive ending to the agonizing trauma, a theoretical point in time where the relentless suffering miraculously ceases and the fractured pieces of a shattered life are perfectly reassembled into a functional whole. But when you speak with the families who have endured the agonizing purgatory of a decades-old cold case like the brutal 1986 murder of 21-year-old Gregory Masawo, you quickly learn that closure is nothing more than a comfortable myth invented by a society that is deeply terrified of lingering, unresolved grief. For these families, there is absolutely no finality, no neat emotional bow to tie around the devastating reality that the person they loved was violently destroyed and discarded in the dirt beneath the Wekele overpass. Instead of closure, they are forced to seek a much more complex and elusive state of being, a delicate psychological equilibrium where the overwhelming pain of the loss is somehow balanced against the necessity of continuing to live their own lives. They must learn to carry the heavy, suffocating weight of the unknown with them every single day, navigating a world that constantly reminds them of the terrifying fact that a vicious killer successfully outsmarted the authorities and vanished into the tropical background. The island of Oahu, with its stunning volcanic ridges and pristine sunlit coastlines, serves as both a beautiful sanctuary and a haunting psychological prison for those who are inextricably linked to this unsolved tragedy. Every time they drive along the massive freeway, they are forced to physically pass over the exact dark, isolated location where Gregory S. future was violently extinguished, a geographic reality that makes it entirely impossible to simply forget the past and move forward unburdened. The physical environment itself becomes a permanent, unyielding monument to the injustice they have suffered, a daily reminder that the phantom captured on the Waianae Bank surveillance tape is still out there, hiding behind the protective veil of time and the collective silence of the community. As the years rapidly accumulate and the distance between the present day and that dark September morning in 1986 continues to expand, the psychological landscape of the perpetrator must also inevitably shift and fracture under the immense, unyielding pressure of their own dark history. We often imagine killers as cold, unfeeling machines entirely devoid of human empathy. But the reality is that maintaining a lie of this staggering magnitude requires an exhausting, continuous expenditure of mental energy. For nearly 4 decades, the unidentified man who walked away with Gregory S. automated teller machine card has had to meticulously curate every single aspect of his public persona, constantly guarding against any accidental slip of the tongue, any sudden display of uncharacteristic violence, or any unexpected emotional reaction that might inadvertently betray his horrific secret to the people who surround him. He has been forced to live a completely bifurcated existence, presenting a mask of absolute normalcy to the outside world while secretly harboring the devastating knowledge that he is fundamentally a monster who shattered a family and corrupted the moral fabric of his own community. This agonizing duality is the hidden, self-imposed punishment that accompanies a successful evasion of the law, a psychological rot that slowly eats away at the soul from the inside out. Even if he has managed to entirely suppress his guilt, he cannot escape the terrifying, relentless advance of modern forensic science, a technological revolution that has completely rewritten the rules of criminal investigation since he committed his crime. Every single time a local news station broadcasts a story about a decades-old cold case being miraculously solved through the incredible power of genetic genealogy or advanced biological analysis, a fresh wave of primal panic must inevitably wash over him. He must lay awake in the dead of night, staring at the ceiling and wondering if he carelessly left behind a microscopic trace of his own cellular identity on Gregory's clothing during the brutal, intimate struggle that preceded the fatal plunge. He is acutely aware that the Honolulu Police Department has never abandoned the hunt, and that the original fading physical evidence sitting in a climate-controlled storage locker might suddenly transform into a definitive, irrefutable genetic map pointing directly to his front door. This relentless, unwavering pursuit by the dedicated investigators of the Honolulu Police Department represents the absolute best of the human spirit, a profound institutional commitment to the principle that no victim should ever be forgotten simply because their case is difficult to solve. The modern detectives who have inherited the Gregory Yamada file understand that they are not just investigating a crime. They are fighting a desperate, agonizing war against the destructive power of time itself. They are working against fading memories, degrading physical evidence, and the terrifying reality that key witnesses and suspects are slowly passing away from natural causes, taking their invaluable secrets with them to the grave. Despite these overwhelming, seemingly insurmountable odds, the detectives refuse to surrender, meticulously reviewing every single page of the original 1986 case file with fresh eyes and a renewed sense of moral purpose. They utilize sophisticated digital enhancement techniques to analyze the grainy black and white surveillance footage from the Waianae Bank, desperately hoping to extract a single identifying feature from the blurry silhouette that might finally break the decades-long stalemate. They tirelessly advocate for the application of the newest, most advanced DNA sequencing technologies to whatever biological material was successfully recovered from the original crime scene, knowing that a single microscopic breakthrough could instantly shatter the killer's carefully constructed shield of anonymity. This profound dedication is not fueled by a desire for personal glory or professional advancement, but by a deep, fundamental empathy for the Yamada family and a righteous anger at the arrogant complacency of a killer who believes he has permanently escaped consequence. The detectives serve as the ultimate guardians of Gregory S. memory, ensuring that his name continues to echo through the sterile halls of the justice system and that the search for the truth never truly ends. The ultimate resolution of this heartbreaking mystery, however, may not rely on the brilliant application of modern science, but rather on the fragile, unpredictable nature of the human conscience. The true key to identifying the phantom of the Waka overpass likely rests quietly in the aging memory of a silent witness, someone who has spent the last 40 years carrying the agonizing, corrosive weight of a terrible secret. The Honolulu Police Department's persistent public appeals are a direct, powerful plea to this specific individual, urging them to finally recognize that the loyalties and fears that bound them to silence in 1986 are no longer valid or necessary. They are asking this burdened soul to look past their own self-preservation and acknowledge the profound, unending suffering of a family that has spent generations waiting in the dark for a single ray of truth. The act of coming forward, of finally providing a name to accompany that grainy bank photograph, is an act of immense moral courage that has the power to instantly rewrite the tragic history of this island community. It would finally strip the killer of their unearned anonymity, forcing them to stand in the harsh, unforgiving light of a courtroom and answer for the brutal violence they inflicted upon a completely defenseless 21-year-old bull. It would provide the Yamada family with the definitive answers they so desperately need to begin the impossible process of true healing, replacing the agonizing void of the unknown with the concrete, undeniable reality of historical justice. Until that brave individual finally decides to step out of the shadows and speak the truth, the memory of Gregory Masao Yamada will remain suspended in a state of perpetual, agonizing tragedy. He will forever be the vibrant young man whose boundless future was violently stolen on a dark, forgotten road, his potential completely erased by an act of senseless malice. The island of Oahu will continue to harbor the dark secret of his final hours, the towering concrete pillars of the Waikala overpass standing as unyielding witnesses to a crime that successfully defied justice for 4 decades. But the flame of hope is never truly extinguished as long as there are people who refuse to forget. The tireless investigators, the resilient family, and the deeply compassionate community will carry Gregory S.'s spirit forward, relentlessly demanding accountability and refusing to let his story fade into the obscure archives of history. The pursuit of the unknown man captured on that security tape is a testament to human love and the demand for righteous justice. The truth is still out there, waiting patiently, and soon the silence will finally break, bringing the long-awaited resolution.